I've had a few of them. Good reminder, I should do work while we were all sitting at home looking at Zoom.
There you go.
Okay, I've awesome barbecue. I left the quarter cupcakes, that was sad. I know.
So squeeze the nose and they get, yeah. Okay.
Trying to make it occasion.
Okay,
All right.
it's causing some reflection in the. Sure.
Okay, so we're gonna call the Wednesday, May 18th, 2022 Rail Committee meeting to order. Will you call roll, please? Clerk?
Chair Coop,
Here.
Mayor Burt,
Here.
Councilmember Cormac,
Here.
we have 3 present, thank you.
Do we need to use these microphones?
No, actually, I just speak loudly so that Al can catch you.
Okay. All right, we're gonna do oral communications first on items not on the agenda. So do we have any?
We do have one
Public?
speaker, 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Sumner.
Good to see everyone. So I just want to do a recap. So last month I had submitted or presented what I consider the University Avenue pole color issue. I wanted to give you an update on that. Since then, I've actually gotten 2 commercial painting bids to actually repaint the 11 45-foot poles. And it's roughly $20,000 or around $2,000 per pole. In addition to that, I've secured private funding to actually pay for the project. And today, fast forward to today, I see that the city staff has compiled a list of, I guess, working items. I think that's a great idea. Number one, I would love to be on that list, and B, I would love to have your assistance in working with the city staff and Caltrain to actually get the project painted or completed. I realize this is a small project. It's $20,000 compared to the millions you're dealing with, but it's actually very important to me and my neighbors. And I honestly think it's a mistake that we can correct. So that's what I'm asking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sumner.
Summer.
We have one more request. Sure.
Good afternoon. I was just calling or commenting that in reviewing tonight's agenda for the Citizens Advisory Committee for Caltrain, the Finance Department will be giving a budget update, and I just reviewed the slideshow, and one of the items that they're having a budget shortfall, not surprising given all the post-COVID ridership drop and all that. And so part of what they're thinking of possibly deferring is a capital item for the San Francisco Creek Bridge rehabilitation or replacement. It's about, I think it was about a $4 million and some change item that they may or may not defer, depending on whether or not they can get the 3 member agencies to kick in proposed contribution to the capital budget. So just that was an FYI. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. And it looks like that's all for our public comments. And so we'll move to the first item, action item, updates from Caltrain, VTA, and city staff. Want to take that and get started?
Yes, I'm not sure that we have, hi, good afternoon. I'm not sure that we have anybody joining us from either VTA or Caltrain today.
So
Tell up on the
was
participant.
staff able to get any answers to the questions or to the to-dos actions that was presented at the last row meeting from Caltrain?
So I'll cover that in the staff updates if that's all right. So I'll go ahead and proceed into the staff updates, assuming that we don't have Caltrain or VTA present. I'm Philip Cami, Chief Transportation Official, and I'll just go over, I think, four or five different small updates. First, I wanted to mention on the Quiet Zones project, specifically for Palo Alto Avenue, that city staff, our senior engineer, Ripon Bhatia, is currently working with Menlo Park on evaluating the bids that were received from their request for proposals, and that the city of Palo Alto is planning to continue to work with Menlo Park on that initial study for Palo Alto Avenue. And the initial study will really inform us of what the project scope is and inform us of what potential project costs could be for design and construction. And then once we have that, we could move it forward as a project with probably with a request for funding that would be needed for the project. Moving on, just wanted to note that we received an email from VTA with response to the request for Measure B grade separation funding. And we received a partial response that we could use the funding for the additional studies. As I mentioned previously, that's going to be incorporated, excuse me, into our item that is planned for this upcoming council regarding the additional studies. And that BTA is doing due diligence to research if the additional bike ped crossings would be allow, or what they consider allowable within the measure, and that the general manager will be sending a formal response regarding this issue to the mayor. Wanted to note that city continues to evaluate and also prepare for grant opportunities for grade separation projects, and currently evaluating all the grant programs that are available. And Ripon's been pulling together information for grant applications for grade separation projects as they appear. And finally, wanted to note on the question that you were asking regarding the request that was really request for Caltrain, that we have a meeting scheduled with the city manager and myself and Ripon to discuss the technical issues. That's scheduled for this Friday, but noting that we probably won't have time to cover all of the technical issues in this. And so we'll really just be broaching the subject with them, and we would be following up with a letter with more detail regarding these technical issues. And with that, I just want to check and see if, Ripon, if I missed anything that you wanted to provide any additional context.
No, I think we covered it all. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kami. Does the committee have any questions? Oh, before we do that, we take public comments, right? So is there any public comments on this item?
We'll do one more.
Okay. And then I can.
Go ahead.
You don't- Just speak loud.
Oh, great. Okay, sorry.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
been a while.
It's right here.
It's here. Thank you. Okay. Hi, my name is Nadia Naik. I just wanted to ask, is there an opportunity for the city or ex-CAP members or whomever to help VTA understand the importance of those bike ped crossings so that we can kind of reiterate to them why they should be giving us that money. Because I think if we just say they're for bike projects, we need them, it's a little bit different than explaining that we think that they're precursors to the needed grade separations. And if there's anything that we can be doing more from our end to help with that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we bring it back to the committee.
Sure.
Mayor?
Yeah, so one thing is a follow-up to what Mr. Brandt had brought up, which is a status on the San Francisco rail bridge analysis that Caltrain's been doing. And he mentioned that it's tentatively to be postponed in their capital budget, which I hadn't heard about. And also, I don't know whether our staff is just aware of what were the results of the study that Caltrain has been doing on that bridge.
Thank you. I knew I was going to miss something in my update. Appreciate you keeping me on task there. Apologies. I want to make a correction. We're meeting with VTA on Friday and we're meeting with Caltrain on Monday. So this is what happens when I'm out of the office. My schedule gets really jumbled. But yes, so we do have a meeting with. Oh, Phil, we've got you here.
Phil is unmuted.
Well, he's muted.
He might have wanted to talk in the public comments. I'm not sure, but just to note that, yeah, we are planning to talk with them about the San Francisco study.
Okay, so we haven't heard anything about that?
No, Ripon, you didn't get any additional updates other than we're going to meet with them to talk, right?
I did reach out to them and we are setting up a meeting to go over the analysis of the details of the inspection. They have already conducted the inspection at the bridge and they were going through the analysis period at this time. We have a meeting, upcoming meeting with them that we plan to go over those results and the next steps.
Okay. And then on the your upcoming meeting on Friday with VTA, one of the things that came out in our last meeting was the VTA CEO, in response to us discussing whether we could use our Measure B dollars for the bike and pedestrian grade crossings or separations that are related to our vehicular separations. And she had emphasized, as did Michelle Bouchard from Caltrain, that there are a lot of other funding sources for active transportation that they thought we would potentially qualify there, and that it might be a lot better for us to pursue those rather than use our Measure B dollars for that purpose. And when I was meeting with Senator Becker's staff in Sacramento last week, I mentioned similarly this whole sequencing that we have to proceed on our bike and ped crossings in all likelihood before we can proceed on our vehicular ones. His chief of staff, who has worked with MTC and others, emphasized the same thing, that there are a lot of dollars out there. So I know that City Manager Shikata had recently mentioned that we're engaging more with a grant consultant and who also does a lot of the administrative work and that burden. Are we specifically having a plan or engaging with them or on our own to pursue these sizable and emerging active transportation grant funds?
So first, yes, we are engaging with them to pursue these funds, but I will say that I don't think that these particular crossings are at a place where they're ready to apply for these funds. So I want to talk about process, but for grant applications. So we are actually applying for almost all of the funding possibilities that are out there for different projects. Typically, they're projects that are already in the conceptual phase. or have conceptual design and have already done public outreach and have already been council directed as projects. So that's kind of the phase where we typically have projects at where they become a project that can be competitive. So with specifically to these additional bike and ped crossings in relation to the grade separation project, we are in the process now where we're starting to work on our bike ped plan, which will do customer outreach, or I'm sorry, not customer, community outreach. Although everyone's customer of us, so that's a challenging way of communicating. But everyone's a customer to us. But community and users, to make sure that they all, that we have support for our projects and that we're understanding the projects, and then also that we're not only connecting to existing bike and pedestrian networks, but that we have a bike and ped network that plans for connections to those facilities as well. So that's all part of the process. But the next steps in that would be to do that community outreach, to and then to better understand the alternatives and the options, and then to have prioritization that is, sets those aside as projects. Potentially.
So I appreciate that, and we'll be able to discuss that a little more when we get into the work plan. I think one of the questions we want to ask ourselves is, given the circumstances, is it best to fold these into the broader discussion on bike and ped master plan that has been going on for some time, and these are just starting to get integrated with that? Or do we want to elevate them so that we can pursue what may be some really important funding, and given how dependent the balance of our plan is on these? So we can discuss that later. And then lastly, I just wanted to give an update. When I met with Senator Becker's staff, we also talked about this whole process of the Mtc grants that had come out for grade separations, and he and his staff are very interested in supporting us and other cities in his district on the corridor, be able to access those funds more. And because of the kind of the opaqueness of that process to date, they've offered to facilitate an upcoming meeting with MTC and them and us. And so hopefully that's on the near-term horizon. And that was it for me on that.
I don't have anything on the front.
Okay. Is there any other input from staff on this particular matter?
I'll say that, yeah, your guidance is very helpful, and of course that will be helpful to us in strategizing how we prioritize, how we develop the project, and how we find these projects to be fit for the grants and be prepared, because it does require a lot of effort to put grant application. If we are prepared in a manner that we could be having better chances of both getting those, then we should strategically develop and plan for those and as we move forward.
I have a question. In terms of the bike and ped, in particular, those that are going to facilitate back and forth where the tracks are going to be worked on, how do we elevate? Is there a way to elevate those paths to a higher priority or timeline that is sooner than later?
Sure, I suggest, and I think perhaps the mayor was alluding to this, it'd be good for us to take that up under the work plan.
Oh, okay.
And because we've got some material that might be helpful there.
Okay. In that case, if there's no other questions or comments, then let's move to the work plan. Item number 2. It's the discussion of Rail Committee 2022 work plan to be recommended for City Council approval. So staff, you want to go ahead?
Thank you. I'm so sorry. My
No worries.
challenge of having everyone be home sick as I've got everyone home here stepping into on me. So thank you very much once again, Philip Cami, Chief Transportation Official. So just noting, this is really, a discussion item, and really want to keep it open, and noting that the list that we have in this is not exhaustive, nor was it intended to be so. But these are the various items that have been brought forward by either the community or the committee as items that we think merit a discussion today. And really, the hope is that we could, at the end of this item, which potentially I'm noting might carry on beyond one meeting if necessary, but if we can, provide a recommendation to the city council. And also, I do want to note one more challenge is that the city council does have quite a compacted schedule at this time, as I'm sure you're all aware.
Can I,
Yeah,
jump
please
into-
go ahead.
So thank you for this update to the staff report that included this list, and that came out kind of last minute. And in parallel, I was struggling to try to think through what would be in a work plan, and came up with this list that has a lot of overlap to what you did. Couple things that, so we have it at our places right now. I did add a couple columns to try and identify which things look like they would require council approval, and then a column for us to begin to prioritize items, because it is quite a list of actions. And the council approval, as we look at how can this committee function most effectively, and I was reflecting on when we had for several years a rail committee and how that worked, and a lot of what allowed the rail committee to really get a lot done was we were very deliberate in having a set of guiding principles that the council had endorsed, and the council authorized the rail committee to proceed within those principles, as opposed to having to go back to the council for each specific item, as long as an item was within those principles. And if we were in doubt, we'd loop back to the council and seek their confirmation or clarification. So I don't know what's going to be the right way to proceed with our discussion. I think the list that I've got is maybe organized in certain categories more, and framed in a way that lets us look at kind of next steps in terms of either it's a high priority item or it has to go back to the council for authority, but it's up to you folks on how to just work through kind of overlapping documents.
Yes, please.
I'm a little confused. Has the staff presentation for this concluded? Philip, you gave an overview.
Yes, apologies. I don't really have much of a presentation on this. This is really open for committee discussion, I think.
Okay, and did we want to take public comment before
Yes.
we start discussing, or?
If you don't mind.
Oh, I don't mind at
Okay.
all. That's why I'm just, yeah.
I'm sorry?
I was gonna request if we could do it after, because then we can respond to whatever comes up in the work plan. Otherwise, we don't know what he's presenting.
He's done presenting.
No, he's talking about it,
Oh, and my,
whatever that is.
You just got
Do
it.
you have it that you can present on screen? Would it be
I think
possible
we can
to
pull it up.
throw it up onto the screen?
Maybe an alternate way to think about this, since Pat seems like you put this together, is I mean, I've certainly reviewed what the staff shared publicly yesterday. Maybe we could work through this framework, and then you can add in where things are missing, or.
Well, it's a question too of this, the staff one is more of a list without groupings. That's not so critical. And then we certainly, whichever list we try to walk our way through, I think we do want to identify which things need to go back to the council for authority and begin to work through a prioritization process. Even if we don't prioritize everything today, we might want to identify any things that are clearly highest priority and any things that are clearly kind of on a low bucket that we're not going to be contending with right away. We just want to capture it and not lose sight of it.
Okay, so sorry, we're done.
I was going to say everything in between is probably where we'll struggle on prioritization.
So just thinking out loud here, perhaps we could go through the alphabet soup. Impressive, by the way, you used almost the entire alphabet here. Looks like a council motion. And cross off anything that we don't think is ours, or, you know, make the sort of notes you talked about. And then we could group them and prioritize them. Does that make sense?
We could. I mean, these are grouped, but in the
Well,
list
and
I
then we
did
can
there.
rely on you to add in whatever it is that you just provided.
We can do it, we can go with the staff report and then also review what Pat has brought forward and try to group it together and see what are the overlaps. But I just want the members of the public to know that we're gonna go ahead with the discussion on the work plan. And then we'll take public comments at that point.
Okay.
Also, I could make a suggestion, Chair, members of the committee, that combining a few just observations of what Pat put together with what staff did, and just in full disclosure, what staff did was took a list of issues that the chair had identified as potential topics for committee discussion, and then we provided some context, being a statement of where the issue currently stands, at least from a staff perspective, and then some considerations for how to address it for the committee. Maybe to take that third column and break it out a little bit more in terms of the considerations for the committee here, might be helpful to think about the issue itself as presented. Then what is it that the council is trying to achieve with the issue? Then the committee's role is the rail committee. What is the role of the rail committee in helping the council reach some steps or progress on the issue? And then what Pat adds is timing on what and when that might be addressed. I think the timing is probably one that we can come back to once we have some sense of which issues the committee will want to take under your work plan. And then ultimately, all of this, as we've currently framed it, would go to the council for approval as to your work plan. And such that if, for example, the bicycle transportation plan, if the council as a whole said, well, we don't think it fits under the rail committee or however it's described, and want it to go somewhere else, that we have clarity on that. Or the council says, yes, here's the role of the rail committee with respect to the bicycle transportation plan. We're all, the council as a whole is in sync, and then rail committee is ready to go. Now, the mayor had suggested guiding principles perhaps in as one way to frame that direction. So we can be as specific or as general as you'd like to on that basis. So
Sorry, but that's different than the guiding principles that are referenced in Q, which are related to how we evaluate the grade separation.
Right,
Okay.
very different.
Okay.
Yes, different kind of principle.
Thank you.
It's rail committee guiding principles versus grade separation criteria guiding principles.
Exactly.
Oh, and I should have mentioned that I just tried to capture on the front over the last year referrals from city council meetings, principally to the rail committee.
Great. So with that suggestion, if I could ask then Philip and Ripon to take that first item, the bicycle transportation, pedestrian transportation plan, just in a snapshot where we are on that issue, and then we can come back to the question for the committee as to what role the rail committee would have on. Well, also, it's a bit of a curve, acknowledging, Philip, as you just heard, the rail committee's interest is in prioritizing the crossings of the rail line within the context of this whole transportation plan. You get that, Philip?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you on that last bit. The,
Just
the interest in,
acknowledge
yeah, sorry.
interest in prioritizing the crossings of the rail line within the citywide bike plan.
Right, right. Well, so just to note, and I also want to mention that we have Sylvia Starlack on the call, who's got staff that's working on the bike and ped plan. But currently where we are is we've got a scope prepared that we're waiting for procurement to release as a bid for selecting a vendor to lead, a consultant to lead the study of the bike and ped plan that will really span until 2023, but we'll start off with a really community outreach tool that will collect information from people. So that's the current status, is that we're expecting that bid will go out fairly soon. Sylvia might have more details on when exactly that is going out. So I'm inviting her to join in and share that if she has it.
I do have it. Thank you. We did take the scope to the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee at their May meeting. We just received their comments, and we are going to incorporate their comments into that scope and deliver that to procurement as soon as possible.
Yeah, so once that is out, the intention of the bike ped plan is to seek community input, and then also to go to the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee, City School Traffic Safety Committee, and then the Planning and Transportation Commission, ultimately for their recommendation to the City Council as a whole. And we do expect at this time now, pending, we haven't received bids yet, so that's going to, of course, define this, but we're expecting that potentially that would come sometime in 2023 to City Council for approval.
That was my question. When in 2023?
Yeah, so I just want to, I don't want to overly overpromise. I want to note that we expect that this could be a 12 to 18 month process, depending on, how the input flows.
Once it starts, or does that include having to go through procurement and the RFP?
No, we're talking about from now. So we're expecting 12 to 18 months.
And that's helpful too. I just say that on a number of things, like we just had an update on the quiet zone, but we're really going to be looking for, so when do we tentatively expect that such and such will happen, as opposed to kind of this open description, we're working on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But I do want to note that the bidding environment has been a little bit different. So we could we might end up with vendors that are not ready to go, or maybe we're in a queue or something like that. So
we'll appreciate that some of those things are best estimates, but that's more valuable than we're working on.
Yes. Yep. Understood.
And sorry,
No, go ahead.
Mr. Kami, do I also recall that there was a staffing constraint in this plan? Has that been rectified as well?
Yes, thank you. We were waiting for Ozzy Arce, who council met with this Monday.
Mr. Arce has a long list of things he's gonna do for us.
He does. I mean, that's why some of our critical projects were backlogged, but just noting that he's our actual real transportation planner that focuses on these type of projects.
Oh, okay.
Great.
That's good to know.
Is he doing the shuttle too?
No, he's not doing the shuttle.
Okay, just checking.
Good.
Okay, great.
Can you then a little more introduce us to what his purview will be?
He's going to oversee the consultant in this project. So he's going to manage the consultant for the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan project.
Okay.
So if I could, Phil, I'm going to push you a little bit on this. With a 12 to 18 month timeline for a citywide plan, what does that mean in terms of our ability to be ready to submit grant applications for crossing funds?
Yeah, well, I think that does potentially push us back until the point where either we've got something in the bike and ped plan that we think is significant enough that we want to, that we have, either drive to pull it out of the plan and make it prioritized. We've got enough public outreach on it that we feel comfortable that it's possible that we could move it up earlier, but I would think it's unlikely that we would have substantial work towards that before 12 months from now.
What's the gap, Philip, between the plan being completed and us having a design for the crossing, for the bike cross? And you know what, let's just be specific. Let's assume we're talking about Charleston Meadow. Because after the plan is complete, then it's not gonna have a design, right, for that project that we could bid out and have costs that we could go get grants for? Isn't there another step in the process?
Yes, that's correct. But I'm assuming for Charleston Meadow, you're talking about like the Matador Creek or.
I don't know which one, because we haven't designed it yet, right? We're waiting for the plan.
Yeah, sir.
We didn't
Yeah.
vote on that one.
Seal and Mama Verde was in the motion.
Yeah. So, but noting, yeah, we don't have a location. So that's part of what the plan would help us to do, is identify the correct locations.
Phil, let me recap that a bit for the purpose of geography. I think the way that staff, and Philip and Ripon, correct me if I'm wrong, the way that staff has started to conceptualize these crossings, Charleston Meadow would, as it relates to bike crossings, and I'll just use that as shorthand, that Charleston Meadow would be integrated with the design of whatever grade separation option is. Moving further north, what I've noted as the El Dorado to Loma Verde, call it segment, or somewhere in that space, it has been discussed for another crossing. And further north, somewhere between Seal and Kellogg, have been identified as locations for another crossing. So the dilemma, and this is the cart and the horse dilemma, is that in the absence of the citywide plan, well, first off, to acknowledge, we expect that the latter two, the El Dorado to Loma Verde and Kellogg to Seal, to be potentially controversial in terms of what specific streets are identified. And so the staff approach has been to use the citywide plan as a way to identify the connectivity between those crossings and the overall citywide transportation for bikes in such a way that addresses both the community engagement as well as understanding that there may be some very localized mixed opinions about which crossing is best. That correct, Philip?
Yeah, and to note, one of the things that the BPTP project will do is it will have a map where people can select things on the map. So that will be one of the outreach tools that will be used, where people can help us to select locations that would be ideal. So that's one of the information collection tools that will be used.
Just
So
to
can we
be
be a
clear,
little
that's
more
direction.
concrete? Right, my understanding is that it's likely that we'll rebuild. Are we gonna do Charleston and Meadow at the same time? We're gonna do them at the same time, or no?
I don't, you mean the grade separations? I don't think that's.
I can add some information. I think we need to kind of strategize on how, there are several questions that are within your,
Yeah.
information right now. So one is the actual grade separation projects. The other is the bike the bike ped crossings that we are looking at as probably mitigation prior to or with along with this grade separation project. And the third thing that we are mixing up with this entire thing is the funding opportunities and the funding priorities of these projects.
Right.
And so there's definitely going to be several steps involved in identifying these priorities and making priority candidates. That way we can strategize and also plan for how we want to fund these things through the grant opportunities and through the mix of local and the other funds that could be available that we have. So I think it's too preliminary at this time, and that's becoming sometimes challenge for the staff also is to how we should plan and strategize for these grant applications. Because the grant applications in itself requires a lot of effort that has been done prior to. We have to show kind of an effort on the part of the city that has already been done to support our case that we want to build these in a time. So, and there are time constraints and budget constraints that are associated with each of the grant that will be limiting upon us. So if we get a grant and we are not able to deliver, we are going to return it back to them.
I know.
We don't want to get into that shape where we are preemptively getting the funding, but we are not ready for that. So the project readiness and the criticality of those grants are going to be also on our discussion, and maybe that's the kind of discussion we want to have for as funding opportunities or as part of the like and the grade separations also. There are planning opportunities like Mayor has previously mentioned that we could utilize all the construction dollars that we can use. So that's another level of complexity that comes into how we want to fund these projects. Even for the planning grants, they are very competitive because there are less number of dollars, but they are much more availability and a lot. It's federal funding, and mostly the federal funds have some of those components that have the planning component. Even in the planning component, there are requirements that you have to have certain level of capital improvement project development. I mean, not
right,
because when the planning in itself is a terminology that can be used very loosely across the different entities, across the different people understand. Planning, for someone could be environmental documentation and conceptual plan development. Planning could be in preliminary engineering design at 30% development of the plans and the NEPA and SEPA clearances. So different entities use these terms in different ways, and my experience has been that when we apply for these grants, if we have done our homework prior to, we have a lot more chances and possibilities of getting these grants that can be used. There are a lot of other strings that are attached with these grants. Timing definitely is always the case. There's other hurdles that are also, and that's another thing that we would need the direction from the council is when we're looking at these projects, how do we want to fund it? When do we want to get these funding? What are the best possible utilizing of these funding?
I don't know about the rest of you. I'm feeling like this is very circular. I'm feeling like we're supposed to just, like at some point someone has to decide. And if what I'm hearing from you is you need council to decide what we're going to build first, so you can work on something else, then I feel like we should just say that. I mean,
actually, well, I don't know that was your message. So if I could just clarify, I think it is an issue of sequence.
That's what I'm saying, but I guess I just feel like we should surface assumptions. I think probably everyone in this room might not have the same assumptions, right? There might be some belief that we have to build a separate bike mitigation that is not the one that's connected with that beforehand. Well, let's just decide if we're going to do that or not.
Correct. I mean, there are other things that may be associated with it is we're still waiting on VTA's decision on what can be funded. Is that it is a point in our equation in decision making. The bike pedestrian plan in itself, the timing of that development in itself may be another point in getting that to a discussion point, right? Are they all linked together with this? These are the kind of questions that come to our mind is in this sequence. Are these other elements that need to be processed and decided?
Okay, kind of getting a headache thinking about the number of things that going around. I will tell you where I am. We need to get the kids to be able to bike to Gunn High School. It's just that simple. So if we're going to rebuild both those south crossings at the same time, then we have to build something else first.
Right.
If we're doing the crossings at Charleston and Meadow one at a time, then maybe we can manage it other ways. Like that's.
So I think Rippon's answer to that question was, we don't know. Right? That was a really long answer to, we don't know, but I think that was the bottom line.
What's the assumption? Is the assumption that we're gonna build Charleston and Meadow at the same time? I've certainly heard that assumption, you know,
It hasn't been said.
No, so there hasn't been a prioritization on which first crossing which will go first, Churchill, Meadow, or Charleston, or if Meadow and Charleston should go together. So those are the
Okay.
two.
Maybe that's what we need to be doing. Okay, well,
That's
All right.
one of the decision-making points that we stop there.
yeah. I mean, I certainly, we all have opinions on that, but at some point, this has to be presented in a way for us. I feel like we could just keep talking about this and not get to whatever it is you need to move forward.
So if I can, just to come back to your earlier question, which I think really was, what would be the sequencing for additional crossings? And just to note that the sequencing would likely, or typically would be, that we would do the community outreach, then we would go to council for project prioritization. And then if we have identified projects or desired projects, which, you know, as an example, these bike crossings, then we would do feasibility or concept alternative analysis, and that's what would follow. And that, you know, once we have a conceptual project, that's when we can really typically apply for funding.
Yeah, I'm less focused on the funding at this moment.
Yep,
And
understood.
because I think we will work that out. That will happen somehow, some way. I trust this group to do that.
If I could also, in the hopes of clarifying, I think we are conflating a couple of issues. One that the Councilmember McCormack has raised is maintaining access or crossings at Charleston Meadow during construction. That's a separate issue from where will additional crossings be established in the two segments further north.
Maybe some people have said it's not a separate issue.
Understand. I think it's fair to assume, to your point, that staff believes it is not optional to maintain bike crossings in the vicinity of Charleston and Meadow during construction. I don't think there's any scenario in which staff has considered it possible to just cut it off for the period of construction necessary for those crossings.
Sorry.
Should I say that again?
Yes.
What does not optional mean?
It means it's essential to maintain the ability to
During
cross
construction, you expect people on bicycles, kids on bicycles, to be able to ride their bikes somehow, some way in the Charleston Meadow area.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Well, that's news to me at least.
If I might clarify, in the 2012 bicycle master plan, the two crossings that the city manager mentioned are already in your work plan. So they have already received previous things. So the Matadero Creek Caltrain Alma Barrier connection, and the other one is got a different name, which is the Pierce Park Caltrain Alma Street Barrier connection. That's what they're referred to. So there are project descriptions that already exist that you have already put into the comp plan, that you have already put into the bike master plan, and you've had for a while.
Yeah, to be fair, that was 10 years ago, and I feel like.
I just
a lot
want to
of
make,
things-
it's, in other words, it's not a new project, it's a defined, it's a plan.
if-
with a new term.
If I can, and I apologize for this, but I'm not sure if, and apologies to this point, but I don't know if we should just have members of the public speaking without opening to public comment. But appreciate the comment. Just to note that, yes, they were really broadly mentioned in there. They were not prioritized. And they were, you know, as an example, the Caltrain Alma Barrier crossing at Matadero Creek was listed as between Margarita and Loma Verde or avenues. So it's kind of broad. It wasn't really defined, and it was certainly not prioritized, and it was done like 12 years ago. So yes, I do think that there's relevance in looking at this again.
Okay, thanks, that was helpful. I need an aspirin, but yeah.
Understood.
Are you Are you
Yeah,
done?
that's enough on this
Okay.
for me.
Pat?
Yeah, a couple things. One on process. Yeah, it's further down our list. And there's something that the city manager had brought up in a conversation I had with him is what, in this committee, what might be a future role of incorporating XCAP leadership in this committee in a way like we've done with SCAP and advisors. So I think that's something for us to be thinking about, but it's further down the list. Couple things. First, on the pitch we make to VTA, I want to make sure that we're asserting the similarity between what we're asking for on Measure B dollars to be used for our bike and ped crossings with what VTA has already authorized for Measure B dollars for Castro in Mountain View. So Castro is going from having been a vehicular crossing to a new rebuilt crossing that will only be for bikes and peds. I haven't seen the design, but I think it's a more open paseo kind of thing, but it's still a bike and ped crossing that's being paid for out of the Measure B grade separation dollars. So I'm not sure how our proposals on bike and ped crossings that we have established are clearly related to our vehicular crossing sequencing, how that's fundamentally different. And they may not be thinking of it that way unless we really push them to think of it that way. And then we really do have a bigger question here. Is part of what we've been struggling with is, in an ideal world, these big expenses of our bike and pedestrian plan of crossings across the tracks would follow the completion of the whole update to the bike and ped master plan. But that may really interfere with major funding opportunities if we go sequentially that way. And that's the issue that we're going to have to struggle with. Certainly, we don't want to pursue initial designs and things before we've agreed on locations. If the design is location dependent, if we move it a street or two, and it probably is. But I don't know that it needs to be dependent on everything else that is in the bike and ped master plan. It would be, if we didn't have this urgency for big buckets of money, then the argument for waiting and folding it into a master plan, I think would be more compelling. But I think we need to figure out whether we can carve these out and move them forward on a more expedited basis so that we can try to tap into major dollars that appear to be available. So those are my main things. I don't know when or how we should best make that decision. I guess that's another question, whether this committee makes a recommendation to the council on that topic. And we don't necessarily have to do it in the context of just an initial review of the work plan. I don't think we want to wait very long before we make a recommendation to the council. Okay.
If I could suggest, if nothing else, given what staff described as the status of the request for proposals on the citywide plan, that request for proposals needs to include an element of prioritizing these crossings and to have that be a part of the scope for what we're seeking consulting assistance.
Prioritize new crossings or changes at the existing crossings?
I think we're talking about new crossings. Again, running with the assumption here that staff has, to this point, with respect to Charleston and Meadow, again, taking it as mandatory that the approach to construction needs to accommodate bikes and people getting across the right of way during construction.
Okay.
Philip, how does that sound?
Yeah, it does. Sorry, and I just wanted to note from earlier, just looking at the 2012 bike and ped plan. I know this is a little bit late, but the seal is not actually included in the list of projects, or the Caltrain crossing, I should say, at Piers Park Boulevard.
Wasn't there another one that was generically in that area?
It is listed, but it's not included in the list of projects. So it was not included as a project.
Okay.
It does have a line on the map, but there's not much to it. It's not included as a project. So I'm just noting further that this really does need to be prioritized.
Okay.
So are you saying that this needs to go to council in order to be prioritized and to be put on the plan?
Well, then, the next step, again, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, but the next step on the plan is for council to approve the consultant contract to work on the plan. Correct?
That's correct.
All right, so yeah, I think you can expect to see this issue addressed in what the council is asked to approve.
And is the consultant now being, is there a proposal to hire a consultant at this point for specifically this plan?
For the citywide plan,
For the citywide ped and bike plan?
yes,
But we don't have a consultant for that.
correct,
No,
not yet, that's,
They haven't sent the RFP yet to purchasing,
They're working on it.
because
And
they
then
had to
they-
wait for Mr. Buckray.
Well, yeah, noting actually, we're just getting,
Arce.
yes, thank you. Noting that we were just getting final feedback from the payback committee on the scope.
And then you have community engagement after that.
That's
And
correct.
then it comes to council.
well, council approval on the contract, the consultant selection, then the consultant gets started, then the community engagement on the plan itself.
And along with the community engagement, we have multiple other committees that we are planning to take this through, including Payback City School Traffic Safety Committee and the Planning and Transportation Commission.
Okay,
Well, so it sounds to me like the substance of crossings will not be back to this committee until mid-23. That would be
Well,
my
under
guess.
this scenario.
Under this scenario, yes.
that's a long
Yeah,
time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel strongly having, we all saw what happened, with Ross Road, that we need to collectively look at the entire city and figure out what are the priorities. It may be that these are the priorities. It may be something else. It may be the people who are writing in about, biking on Embarcadero to Pali. That has nothing to do with, these crossings. It's because they're staying on the north side. They're not even getting towards Church.
Well, that's actually listed as a related matter here. That's a, I'll just say that.
I'm sticking with saying that I think the plan, as I said before, I don't think this information is changing my mind, that the citywide plan, I don't want us to prejudge what the priority is in the citywide plan, that it's one of these potential crossings.
So I'll say that pursuing this in order to be able to take advantage of exceptionally large dollars that are out there now, federal infrastructure plan and others that are on the state level for active transportation that may very well not be there in future years, just like we've been told on the federal infrastructure grade separation dollars. We're in a massive budget surplus at the state level. They're putting in some major dollars toward active transportation, and this may be it may be a one shot, it may be ongoing, but I don't think we can assume it's going to be ongoing. So for accelerating a process to be eligible for those dollars doesn't mean that we have necessarily sequenced that ahead of the rest of the bike and ped master plan, which is generally a lot less dollars than building grade crossings. The other point I would make is that we've already set this policy. So outside of the bike and ped master plan, the council has already taken action in terms of the two ones down at Charleston East Meadow, we really don't have a tentative location and design for the bike and ped crossings. But in the vicinity of Loma Verde and the vicinity of Churchill, we've narrowed that, and the council has given direction on pursuing that.
Yeah, the direction is to ensure that the bike ped plan includes consideration and evaluation. It's not for us to do it. It's for us to make sure that Philip and his team do it in the plan.
If I can just really briefly, just to talk about some of the timing for the grants, because I just want to be realistic about our capability of applying for something that we really don't have any concept or feasibility or community outreach on. When we have grant applications that are due as soon as Monday, and many of the grant applications are due next month. I just want to note that I think it's pretty unrealistic that we're going to be ready for grant applications this cycle for these projects that are really not defined projects at this time.
So, yeah, I wasn't, at first, we haven't been informed of your grant application cycle and the specifics. So you're operating from information that hasn't been shared with us in any substantive way. But I would not have assumed that this would be able to be ready anytime near that time frame. The issue is, for each year that we delay being ready, that's that much more time before we would be able to pursue the grants. I'm not assuming that we'd be ready in weeks or even a few months. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
So before we go into any more discussion on this, I've been thinking that, it's pretty substantial what we're discussing. And so perhaps we will open it to public comments on this specific topic, so we can also hear from the public before we continue with the discussion. So if there's anybody who has public comments, please raise your hand if you're virtual, or if you're here, just step up.
Hi, again, it's Nadia Naik, and I want to apologize for speaking out of turn. I know that that was not appropriate, but I just wanted to be sure you guys knew it was happening, and it's hard to break that habit when you've been in this room running meetings in here previously, so I apologize to everybody. I totally agree with what Philip is saying. I think you do need to have some public outreach, but I also agree with what the mayor is saying, which is we got to figure out how to try to get some funding. And so to the extent that there is a way to be able to prioritize some of these projects, I know this is something that Councilmember Cormack had talked about previously, right? That we don't have an order to that bike master plan, and that it's something that really needs to happen. A lot of this work has been mentioned before. It was in the 2012 bike master plan, as Philip Kami said, it wasn't on the list of projects, but part of the reason is, if you remember, in 2012, high-speed rail was still looming. And so part of what the report said is it's pending what was happening with Caltrain. Well, it's been a good 10 years since then, and here we are. And so I think we really do need to make some sort of forward progress. And to the extent that the rail committee can make a recommendation to say, look, we really want to look at the connections across the grades, across the Caltrain barrier, and see how we might be able to front load some of those discussions, I think it would be super helpful, particularly since we've got payback and everybody already engaged on the rail issues previously from the work that XCAP did. So thank you.
Is there anybody else? Is there anybody else?
There's no more ways.
There's no more. Okay,
Actually,
so
got one.
There you go.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's like 18 minutes raised.
thank you.
Thank you. I hadn't planned to speak, but I did want to remark on, there was an earlier back and forth regarding whether to do East Meadow and Charleston at the same time. And I would just add for your consideration that the mobilization, the construction of shoe flies and the mobilization of the various work crews and forces involved in doing a grade separation are such that Belmont and San Carlos did actually a joint project many decades ago now, but I do recall it well. And so they did that all at once. And San Mateo did a whole group at once just recently. The San Bruno did a whole group at once. There are economies of scale. And so I would urge, and certainly there's a ballet of figuring out how to stage within when you're doing a group of grade steps, but how to stage it so that you have traffic concerns and bikes and peds and all of that. But I would definitely urge and suggest that you do you do want to do groupings. It's just in the end a lot cheaper that way. And then to the point about the bike ped projects being separate or whatever, yes, in Mountain View with Castro, they are actually building a car infrastructure as well away from the Castro crossing, so that cars can get up behind the police station up onto the Shoreline Boulevard overpass. There's going to be a new traffic light and intersection up there, and so it's rather involved. But I think some of the comments made are I think fair in that if you're doing a project that has a bike and a car element right at the crossing, that it makes sense that those be viewed as one, as a single project. And so I think there's justification for seeking funds for the bike and ped stuff separately. So there, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll just bring it back to committee. I just wanted to make sure that, since it was such a engaged conversation, that we should include the public on that. Is there any other comments from the committee? If there isn't, then I would say that I think that when you're discussing with the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan with the payback folks, this is where it's going to go, right? That perhaps the conversation that we had in terms of these bike ped paths that will mitigate the crossings when they're being worked on, perhaps those are the ones that needs to be elevated a little bit, and for them to consider. Included in that, I want to make sure that what we had discussed, council had discussed in the past with regards to the Embarcadero pathway and the safety measures there, that should also be reviewed. I think it's been sitting on the shelf now for quite a while, but there is a need there because it does go in, it is a way to get to the train station. So there are safety concerns over there. So I want to ask Ed, what kind of action do we vote on each of this, or in together at the end, this is what we're going to send over to council?
Right, I think probably more the latter, ultimately, that it's a package of items that you're seeking delegation of the council's interest to use the rail committee as the venue for further development of each of these issues.
And in particular on the ones that require council direction versus the ones we already have. And so as we go through it, we'll probably want to just check mark ones that we think we need council authorization on.
And this is why I appreciate that you did, Pat. You have you have one column that indicates whether it requires council approval or not. So then at least we know at a glance what we need. And then you have the priority there as well.
And those weren't authoritative. Those were just kind of draft type
ideas.
Well, at my first glance on what looked to me like it would require council authorization, but the committee may want to add to that or change it. So I didn't mean to imply that it was conclusive.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like we've gotten direction to ensure that the bike ped plan includes the things that are relevant. So what do you think needs more council approval?
Well, potentially, when we looked at that bike ped plan in November, so over 6 months ago, I think we were anticipating that there were two things that changed. Seems like it's moving out in its time horizon that we have those results. And we now have been notified that there are likely a series of major funding sources that may want us to try to accelerate that process from what we had assumed before. That's why we were really talking about it, because last week we had Caltrain and VTA say yeah, we can look at that, but you should really be pursuing these other buckets for those. And then we've had the same word out of our state senator. So two things have changed.
Right, but like,
Yep.
Philip, how long is it gonna take us? Is it gonna, I mean, a year from now and I don't know what the cycle is, like, is it a year from now that you think we'd be ready to be competitive in a grant?
Well, first of all, these grants are not all necessarily on the 1-year cycle. So sometimes they're 2-year cycles. So that kind of depends on the funding program. A lot of them are 2-year cycles.
We'll be ready in 2 years.
Well, I'd like to say that, but I do want to note that, one of the things that potentially if VTA does concur with our request to utilize funding for these crossings, one of the things that we can do is that initial work that we need to do in order to get it to the phase where we can really apply for those really large federal types of projects. Because just noting that a lot of these things are not going to just want to hear that we've got this conceptual idea of a crossing here. They're going to want to see concept plans, outreach, and some kind of alternative analysis that we've done in order to have us be actually competitive for these funding programs. So that's really the question is, how do we get it to that phase where we actually can be competitive for those grants? And so from the standpoint of transportation, I think that the initial step of that would be working on the BPTP, doing initial community outreach, and then determining how we move it as a potentially elevated project within that.
Okay, so in 2 years, we can apply for grants, but not in 1.
I think 1 year would potentially be unlikely, but I don't want to say conclusively no. Maybe things move faster than we hope.
I'm just trying to understand if we should be pushing you and changing our mind about the plan, or if there's no way we're going to be ready anyway. And so let's just do the plan and then we'll be ready in 2 years. That's the question I'm trying to answer.
I'm not sure we know the answer to that. I mean, we still have a question of, are these overcrossings or undercrossings that we'd be building? I mean, some of that also ties to the grade separation questions. I think there's too many unknowns to know that. Also, we don't know if there are going to be these grant opportunities next year that we would be pushing for. So that's something we'll try and figure out, is if they know when the next grant cycles are for these different programs. That's information that we'll be trying to get right now. And it might be information that they don't have the answer to at this point as well. And to answer your question, I mean, really, if we wanted to move these up and start working on conceptual design for these projects right now, the Office of Transportation is, at the point where we wouldn't have additional resources to assign to those projects unless we either add additional staff or add additional outside resources or stop current projects that we're working on.
So just following up on that, I think the assumption is along the lines you were talking about, Philip. If we were able to use Measure B dollars for preliminary design, getting us ready to submit for grant funding, that could be done sooner. We hope that we will get authorization from BTA in perhaps weeks to do that. We'll see. But then the other question is, and this is what we've been trying to frame it as, if this is only folded into the complete bike and ped master plan that probably is 18 months or so away from completion, then it would commence after we have an outreach for the whole plan. Then we go to first base on really a focused outreach and design on these. The question is, do we go sequentially that way, or do we overlap a more focused area on these while we are completing the entire bike and ped master plan? I think that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, and so, if we're going to continue to have connectivity for kids on bikes and people walking during construction, you know, I don't know that I'm ready to push forward the other parts of the plan because, you know, I don't know that I have any evidence in the work that the XCAP's already done or from the prior plan that we need additional connections. I guess it depends a little bit on what we do at MBCAP, right? It's all connected. If in that area, there's substantial new housing, but I know there's space at Barron Park. I don't know. I don't know how to think about this in general.
Well, the one.
I really would like the plan to proceed holistically. We've sort of collectively held ourselves off from doing things one-off, and we've already seen that when we do things one-off, sometimes that doesn't work when we try to chase the funding. And I'm not saying it was wrong to try that, but you know, that's our most recent experience.
I don't know what you're referring to.
The South Palo Alto Bikeways, where we had to turn back the funding.
Well,
And-
that wasn't because it wasn't part of the bike master plan.
So I think, but just to note, I think what's being referenced is to make sure that we have a comprehensive outreach and that we're getting, you know, public input, which we've taken note that, you know, that's really our priority, making sure that our projects are being publicly reviewed before we're out there in construction.
I would just, in terms of framing it in this sequencing, we've got 3 locations that we're talking about, basically. One is Churchill area. That one would need, in theory, to be in place, or certainly strongly preferably to be constructed by the time we would do Churchill vehicular construction. The next one is kind of a midtown area, the Loma Verde.
Sorry, if we did the underpass, if we just do closure,
That's correct.
okay, keep going, sorry.
The midtown area is one that has both its own value independent of the construction, but it also would serve a high proportion of the South Palo Alto bike and ped, both kids and otherwise. It's not down in the far south, but it serves half of South Palo Alto.
It also solves the problem with the tunnel we have now, which is really inadequate at Cal Ave. Not solves, but it's an alternate, it would be an alternate
An
method.
improvement on that,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the last group is down at Charleston and East Meadow, and that we don't know where we might locate the bike and ped crossings in a way that would continue to give the access during vehicular construction. So those are the 3 different ones. And we talk about one-off, but we are in all likelihood going to be doing these in some sequence. They're not all going to be done at once. And these are big projects. Just the bike and ped crossings are big projects and the vehicular ones are huge. The longer we wait to get really momentum on the first of those, it just sets back the whole process. So that's part of what I had as a takeaway from the whole great separation project is, okay, we're realizing we've got to do the bike and peds first. We better get going on them. But then we said, well, we can't even get started on that until we finish our bike and ped master plan. And for various reasons, that's going slower than we had hoped. So and then we get this new information that there's a lot of dollars. Yes, maybe there's not certainty on what's going to be in the next couple of years, but we're being told that there are a lot of dollars out there and we should be trying to prepare ourselves to be eligible for those.
Yeah, I do want to note that we are preparing ourselves to be eligible for those, but for projects that we have at the right, you know, already at the right.
Referring to these projects.
Yes. So, yeah, and I also want to note that unless somebody has information that I don't have, that these projects, these grade separation projects are not about to go into construction. So there's going to be, you know, we have.
Yeah, we've all acknowledged that.
Yeah, right. But just noting,
the point is that the longer we wait to get started,
Yep.
the longer it'll be before we're ready to apply.
But I'm hearing 2 different things. I'm hearing staff say there will still be bike and pedestrian connectivity during construction. And I'm hearing you say we need to build stuff before construction. And
Well,
maybe this is an option as opposed to necessary.
No,
I'm
they
not
didn't say,
denying-
they're not implying that they have the solution to that problem. They're saying they recognize they will have to come up with a solution.
Okay.
That's different.
They'll come up with some solution. And maybe they will.
Magical, fall out of the sky?
I'm not saying magical. I'm saying
Um,
I just heard our city manager say that staff expects that insists. What was
It's
the
a
word?
requirement. It'll be
Yeah.
mandatory.
That there will be connectivity during. That seems to me like it changes the discussion a little bit. you
And just
know?
to note that that's not uncommon for bicycle and pedestrian connectivity to be determined. But, frankly, we can't say what the connectivity would be until we are further into not only having a selected alternative, but also having, further refinement of that alternative and understanding construction means and methods.
And do we need that AE contract to come back to council to approve it so they can do that work? Is that what we're waiting for?
I think what Philip's saying is that it's going to be connected with what design we end up selecting for the vehicular part of it.
Right.
And integrating this within it. And that frankly, we, in the Loma Verde one and the Churchill vicinity one, we don't have that dependency on an integrated design so much. It can be a standalone.
Get it? Well, he said actually it did depend a little bit at the Churchill one. And even at Loma Verde, I mean, I guess we've removed the elevator.
Look,
That's what he said.
I'm not saying that there's no relationship. They're pretty independent. Whereas down in Charleston and East Meadow, they're very dependent.
And I guess the discussion is it necessary? And let's just set Churchill aside for the moment, in South Palo Alto to build, and let's assume it's an undercrossing, I don't know, whatever, pick something. And it's at Loma Verde. Is it necessary to have that physically built before we do the train crossings at Charleston and Meadow? And I'm hearing it might not be necessary. And I'm also hearing absolutely it's necessary. And that's what I'm trying to sort out.
I'm sorry. Did you hear, you're saying you heard me say absolutely that Loma Verde was necessary?
I don't remember the words you used.
No,
but it
well,
was
I'll
a-
just clarify. I didn't say that. What I did say was that that one would help serve half of the users of South Palo Alto, the Midtown users. Whereas there would still be a need for addressing the far south. So I didn't say any such thing. So anyway,
So you think it would be, yeah,
it
I
would
guess there's a
be
difference.
advantageous
Yeah.
for both its independent value of there is no connection to cross the tracks between East Meadow and California Avenue in our city right now. So the connectedness value, and then it'll have a value also to bleed off a high percentage or a very significant portion of the bike and ped traffic that is currently using Charleston and East Meadow.
there's an awful lot south of Charleston that goes. I don't know. I'm still not convinced we have to do those before we do. I mean, it's certainly possible, but I still want to see it in context of the whole thing.
Okay.
Do you want to, what would you like to do? Should we vote on something or do you want to just keep going through the list?
I think we'll keep going on the list until, and then put them all together for a vote. Unless you want to do it separately. All right, so item B, the way that I look at this, item B, which is Embarcadero Road and El Camino Real Improvement Project, that's also a bicycle and pedestrian safety project. And I would have included that within the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. Correct?
Yeah, I'd need to review. I think this might have actually been in the 2012 bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. And it was actually a project that was slated to move forward separately from grade separations as just a bicycle and pedestrian improvement.
Well, actually, it was part of the improvement all the way from Emerson to El Camino on Embarcadero. And it was not only in the bike and pedestrian plan, it was in the capital improvement plan, and was specifically approved by the council and successive councils and capital plans. In 2020, it got removed in part because it was a big dollar complex project, including the El Camino interchange. So now what we're looking at is a much more limited project to deal with the high hazard 50 yards between Emerson and beginning to go down the underpass at Embarcadero. Just that segment.
Who's we?
Well, this is called El Camino, Embarcadero and El Camino. I've raised it publicly a number of times.
Yeah.
And on, that's how I've broken it up, that I think that we should be looking at this as a much more limited project than the entire one to El Camino.
So the connection to the rail committee here is what we had before, which was at the intersection, right? It was at the town and country intersection. Is that what this is referring to? That plan? Yeah.
Well, it was a plan that went all the way from Emerson to El Camino.
That was the plan, but that's not what's listed here. This is just the Embarcadero El Camino intersection one.
No.
I'm just looking at.
Apologies, I might have listed that more briefly in as a just trying to capture what was sent from the chair in a very brief email. So I might have miscaptured that project.
Right,
Okay,
there's
what should we be talking about?
we should be talking about the full length from Emerson to El Camino, because there is
Oh, okay.
a road, a
yeah,
segment
yeah,
where it's
yeah.
unsafe.
No,
And a lot of
further-
kids
yeah,
use that to get to school.
Yeah.
So if we can just talk about that from the whole length of it, it's the entire project, from what I
Including the
understand.
intersection.
Right,
Okay, so from Emerson to El Camino. not
Well,
the
I would
intersection.
argue that that's going to be much more expensive and take much longer than solving a segment that's a high priority right now. So I'm not sure how many people here ride that segment, but when you come on Kingsley into a dead end cul-de-sac, you then have to, you ride in a crosswalk where cars are whipping around El Camino onto Emerson, around Embarcadero onto Emerson without a stop. Cars the other way are coming onto Embarcadero, often rolling stop. Then bikes are forced to ride on the sidewalk for about 30 yards. And then they cross the off-ramp, I don't know if it has a name on it, going from Embarcadero to Alma, all within 50 yards. 3 hazardous crossings and bikes and pedestrians on the same sidewalk. And there was a design that was a segment of the full improvement all the way to El Camino that addressed that small, highly hazardous segment. Getting from there, improving that means that bike riders can then pick up the bike path behind Pally. And that's a very efficient route that becomes the Park Boulevard bike path and can do that safely. So if you were to ride from North Palo Alto area and come in here and ride all the way down to certainly East Meadow, this is the most hazardous area of that entire ride by far. And yet it's a 50-yard improvement to solve. So I would strongly urge that we look at segmenting that project. And rather than continue to park things that, just like last time, it was on the CIP for a number of years, went through a whole council approval process, and then got dropped in 2020, in part because it's part of a much more complicated, expensive, time-consuming project.
So if I could suggest, maybe I'll start with small and then the next step. The small change would be what's currently listed as B. Instead of Embarcadero and El Camino, let's call it Embarcadero and Kingsley, which I think, and again, this, you may need to follow me here, so that we're all speaking to the same scope. And in that context, I think the question for the committee and ultimately the council is this a rail committee topic, or could it actually more simply be a council decision related to the CIP you'll be talking about next month? And I know staff will need to look at bandwidth ability to deliver on the project, but I think it's again already been designed once, so it's a question of the ability to resurrect and resolve that issue.
Oh, I should have made, that's a good point, and I should have made a clarification on the linkage here. So if we have a hypothetical bike ped crossing at Seal, call it, then bicyclists are divided between those who are in Old Palo Alto, who would take that, and those who are north of Embarcadero, who would pursue this. This is, so it's linked to, if we constructed Churchill, where do bikes and peds go? This is both low-hanging fruit, and it's part of something that was actually fully fleshed out in the last bike ped master plan, a full design on the CIP, and then got dropped because it was a much larger involved project at a time of a budget cut. And the question is whether we should do a fragment of it at a fraction of cost, fraction in time, and catch up to what was supposed to have happened several years ago.
So if anything, if you segment it, then segment to address Kingsley and Emerson first. Instead
It's
of
Kingsley
going-
and Emerson it goes to where you begin the underpass. It's just 50 yards. On the map, for some reason, they call that Embarcadero Road as well, that off ramp that goes to Alma. So I guess it doesn't have a separate name.
So again, just the connection to rail committee is that the prior plan for that area is not consistent with the mitigations that are proposed if we close Churchill.
Right.
It seems, I appreciate the potential connection with rail committee and grade separation for the train crossings, but it seems to me like this is a more limited thing that can just either get put back on our list or, included as part of the overall plan.
So Philip, and what needs to be done in order to be put back onto the CIP for count? I mean, what would the next steps be? Because it's actually a vetted project already, right? I mean, from.
It was
Yeah.
once, and
So-
again, to be fair, I think there's been enough staff turnover that none of the transportation staff were here at the time that it was previously, although maybe further down in the organization. So Philip, what are your thoughts on the ability to have this be a CIP discussion, which again, the council will see next month?
Yeah, well, thank you. Just to note that I do think that there would need to be additional outreach on this project. That's not to say that it isn't a project that was previously approved. I do think that it would need some additional outreach, but I do think it could be potentially reinstated as a project. I do want to note that in order to start moving with this project again, we either need to move one of our projects into another phase where potentially it's like a project gets handed off to Public Works and they're actually in construction, and then we free up our engineering staff to work on it or otherwise. But that is completely a possibility.
Well, I don't know how much engineering, what we need to do first, I think, is look at this segment of the project and how fully baked it was. So I'm not at all sure that there's a whole bunch. I don't know how much outreach had been done. it was a fully voted on project in itself and then included for successive years in the CIP. It wasn't an idea. It was, this is a fragment of a fully approved project. And I don't know what additional outreach there was, but I think the transportation staff who wasn't here at the time needs to refresh themselves and look at this segment so that we're getting information from an informed standpoint.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think when we get to the, whenever we're doing, my feeling is that this is a pretty, of the things on the list, a weaker link to our committee, but I'd certainly be comfortable with recommending the council direct finance committee, you know, to, or PT and or PTC, whoever it needs to go to, you know, to look at that. So absolutely, let's look at it, but I'm not sure that here is the right group.
And just to note, I think we were at a point where I think this project had some level of design already done. So when I say additional outreach, I just want to note that I think
No,
this
we-
plan had added outreach. It was listed as the initial project start date in 2015. So I just want to note that we wouldn't want to just start moving this project into construction when in the 7 years since this project was started, new people have probably moved into the area and all that. So we need to make sure we've at least reached out to the neighbors and that there's continued support for this project if it was to move forward.
I just want to make sure, I mean, I think Pat just pointed out to me on the map that it's a very small segment. It's from Kingsley to where the cutoff, where the division happens from Embarcadero to Alma. So it's a very small segment, but yes, you know, I'm sure outreach is great, but in order for finance to be able to determine, or for council to determine whether to include it into the budget or not, I think an updated amount might need to be, you might need to come up with that. And if it's all need for that segment, then it's not going to be as expensive as we would think. I
Well,
mean,
I think
it's
we're
just
gonna have
something
to
that we
direct
need.
staff though to do that work to come back, right? They don't have enough, council would have to direct staff to go look at this project, and then they'd have to come back with like, here's how much it is, right?
So at this point, we would have
And the
to
time.
recommend it. So was that a motion that you made?
No, we're going through the letters, so.
Okay,
I'm saying when we get there, I don't think that that particular one should be on the rail committee plan, but I'm supportive of having council direct staff to look at it,
okay.
understanding that it should be incorporated right into the overall.
Okay. Is there any more discussion on this?
No, I would just add though, when we have a rail committee, it's our primary focus today is on grade separations. Our primary focus when it was last there was on really all the impacts of high-speed rail and the blended system. But it's a rail committee, so it has to do actually with all of the connections and of rail and our transportation. That's the broader purview of the committee. It's not limited to just the new grade separations, although I'd argue that there is some relationship there. But this is a feeding a grade crossing is what it does. That it goes right into the underpass. So
Yeah, I'd actually be interested in understanding what our remit is. I don't know that was ever shared. And my understanding is that segment you're talking about is really primarily used by students going to Cali.
well,
Obviously, some people use it,
it certainly is very strongly by students, but
Yeah.
it's
I mean, that's
used.
what the,
It's used also by pedestrians. We are channeling bikes and pedestrians onto a narrow sidewalk and
not
all that.
disagreeing it's
Yeah.
a problem. I've reviewed those documents and sat with the neighbors. I just don't think that that's work that we need to do here.
If I can also, I just want to note, unless I'm totally reading this wrong, we're referring to project which is in the 2020 CIP, which is PL 15,001. and just to note that that project, at least as it was originally written, was between Bryant and El Camino, and including the Dutch style intersection at El Camino. Am I incorrect? Are we talking about a different project?
No, we're talking about the same project. I'm not sure what, they may have described it from Bryant. I'm not sure, and I haven't seen the final details. I'm not sure what would be between Bryant and Emerson, but maybe there was something that was part of it that was between those two. But Bryant, if you went from Bryant to this location, you'd be looking at another segment that is essentially, you've got a safe route by instead going Kingsley into the cul-de-sac rather than Bryant. So I don't know on that. That doesn't quite make sense to me, but I'm open to understanding it.
All right, so we'll do the recommendations later.
Maybe we can make some progress on the next few. I think the following several are clearly within the purview of the rail committee. I might argue C through H.
I had C through G.
Uh,
And are there any that we need to get council
Well, the-
authorization on?
I think the quiet zone, right?
What is the council, has the council done any action on quiet zone?
No, first or third time.
Well, in
No, I mean, we've
2015,
had staff say that previously that they were working with
I mean,
Menlo Park on it.
I'm so sorry. This recent thing that occurred a month ago is the first that I have heard of this. I haven't heard this come to council before. We
Okay.
came here.
So, you know, that is a good point. To the extent, again, Philip, redirect if I get this wrong. Staff is working with Menlo Park staff to incorporate Palo Alto Avenue in the scope of a quiet zone analysis that they are proceeding with. Our next step would be to bring to the city council whatever agreement is necessary for that participation. But is that correct, Philip?
Yes, thank you. That was correct.
Okay, so
And just to note that we, you know, the initial study we anticipate will not be very much. And so we believe that we can go ahead and proceed with this initial study. And that will inform us of what the actual project would be as far as scope and costs.
Okay, so Menlo Park's the lead agency and we're working with them. And do we know what our share of this initial cost is and what time frame they would be done with that first step?
Actually, I'm not sure if Ripon has new information on this because he's been sitting on interview panels for this. But I don't think we have initial cost estimates yet, although we don't anticipate, noting that they're doing more than just, Menlo Park is doing more than just Palo Alto Avenue. So we would be responsible at least for a share of the Palo Alto Avenue part of this analysis, this study.
The other thing that I don't see here that I think is in my, maybe not, maybe I didn't even include it, is this is initially a focus on Palo Alto Avenue, but broader question, and this goes to the council, is if we did a quiet zone for Palo Alto Avenue, would we also want to look at proceeding on our other at-grade crossings?
especially Churchill.
Philip or Ripon, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I would say that initial level, we are doing that as a first step, and if the council also believes to look into other locations, we could do it as a next step to whether.
Yeah, and
I think you should ask us if we want to do it for the whole city.
Yeah, we can speak louder. I see Philip is, he's not really hearing you very well, so speak
Yeah,
louder.
thank you. I was just going to add that.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So, I mean, we can look into that as next step. Initially, we will be looking at the first Palo Alto Avenue intersection only. If the council so believes, we can either run parallelly and separately from that project, or we can totally do it separate. But, I would think we can have a learning curve from Menlo Park and then implement on the other two, evaluate on the three other locations.
So first we learned from Menlo Park really how feasible and how expensive it is to do one. Then when it comes to the council, we would have two questions. Do we want to proceed in the near term with one on Palo Alto Avenue? And do we conceptually want to endorse doing it citywide? I think two questions
Yes.
coming to the council.
Yes.
And the three other locations are going to be a little bit different because they are adjacent to a traffic signal, which is a lot different than Palo Alto. Avenue. It doesn't have.
Got it. Thanks.
Now, in moving this forward, the question by having it on the rail committee's work plan is whether the first next step will need to come to the rail committee before it goes to the full council. Philip, do you have a recommendation on that?
Yeah, so actually Ripon and I had talked about this, and we actually certainly want it. We're hoping to bring it to the rail committee. So we have that on our list. We might not have the consultant come to the rail committee, but we certainly would have the information come to the rail committee.
Let me be clear, Philip, we're talking about the agreement necessary to participate in Menlo Park's study.
No,
Right.
I didn't.
That's the
I don't-
first next step.
No, I don't think so. I think we are just planning on moving forward with that unless it is some amount that we do not think we can handle.
So it's with it, you think you have budgetary discretion to do that?
Yeah, we do not expect this to be very expensive.
Okay.
Well then, for the record, let me say that if it does require council approval, we'll just take it to council. We'll assume it'll be a simple consent item.
Yeah.
That won't involve a great deal process.
That's correct, unless rail committee wants to see it another way.
I mean, I think it sounds absolutely reasonable, to move forward. So is there anything else on the quiet zones? I think that's pretty easy, and it's something that we all agree on. The next 1, 2, D, E, F, G. These are all the standards that we kind of need from Caltrain, correct? Right. And this is also where we're kind of not able to really move forward on a lot of what we need to do because of questions that we need from Caltrain. So this is something that I think in your meeting that you emphasize to them. I mean, both you, Ripon, and also when Ed and Philip meets with them.
Well, I think each of these issues have different, perhaps, elements to them. Some are, I'll call them specifically engineering, such as the bridge deck thickness, and a relationship between Caltrain, Union Pacific, high-speed rail. So there may be, while these are all clearly important issues, they may not all have straightforward paths to resolution, and I might even hazard a guess at saying they're not all have the same standing and are affecting our ability to move forward on our designs. So
Are you talking about the list that Nadia emailed?
well, they're somewhat the same. 4 tracks, passing, bridge deck thickness, freight speed, vertical curve, length, geotechnical. I mean, there's overlap between Nadia's list and.
Right,
these
I had a more limited list, and when I read what she sent, it's more inclusive.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When was this email sent? Was it sent
6:30
to
or
everyone
so.
on the rail committee?
So what I meant to, what I'm meaning is that, this is something that Caltrain should be coming, while I appreciate what you said, Ed, I think that it benefits multiple cities. It's not just City of Palo Alto. A lot of these things needs to be discussed and they need to, Caltrain needs to kind of work on that because multiple cities are experiencing this and it can help multiple
Well,
cities.
and the good news is Caltrain has shared with us recently, and I think our staff is meeting with them on Monday, and we'll go into more depth, but conversations I had with them, they said, yeah, Palo Alto is ahead of the other cities in terms of really identifying the issues. And they recognize, and this is part of the discussions I've had through LPMG, they recognize that these are both issues that Palo Alto cares about, but that they really apply to grade separations throughout the corridor to varying degrees, depending on the particular grade separation. So they're appreciative of us identifying these things. I think in the follow-up letter that we're talking about after staff has the meeting, we're going to want to put concretely affirming what we're asking and explaining the reasons for the urgency, really the greater urgency being around the getting lack of resolution to a number of these things is holding us back from eligibility for federal infrastructure dollars.
Allison, do you?
Yeah, I mean, how likely is it that Caltrain will just respond in the same way that they responded before, which is you have to be further down the path, you have to show us what your alternative is before, like, I feel like we've had some version of this discussion for years. Is there some new thing we can be hoping for?
Oh, well, we had some of that last week from them, last month from them, and yes, they have, first, I had previously shared with the committee and the council that through my recommendation through LPMG, they had agreed to set up a kind of a committee or a consortium of cities that are active on the corridor, that are sharing concerns over these similar technical issues. And then more recently, we made the point to them that they've had staffing and other delays on what they kept committing was a time frame for addressing them, that they had said 2 years ago that they were going to look at them comprehensively rather than their old MO of engaging in an MOU with them and with specific requests. Instead, they were going to look at them systematically. They had agreed to that 2 years ago. They just haven't followed through on it yet. And they now have recognized that, yes, they appreciate the urgency and that they've got to make it happen sooner.
Also,
Is that staff's interpretation also of where we are?
I think, well, there's certainly a greater openness to revisiting their standards than has existed previously. And as the mayor pointed out, an acknowledgement that they haven't moved as quickly on that as they had previously indicated they would.
All right, well,
another thing is, Caltrain themselves, they said that, Palo Alto is a lot more, is ahead in all the technical matters. And it's mostly because of XCAP, right? So they have already put together a lot of technical questions that we can just send over to Caltrain for them to review. I mean, a lot of it is already done. So it would be much easier just to forward on.
Well, I don't want to understate the magnitude of the challenge. I think as Councilmember Cormack pointed out, the way Caltrain is likely to look at these issues is to say, at the end of the day, they have standards, and those standards are clear, and that the city of Palo Alto could move forward if we were able to abide by those standards. And it's the waivers, the exceptions from those standards, that is really the topic of discussion.
I'm sorry, that's not my understanding at all. That was their historic position. They have publicly at LPMG meetings and otherwise stated that they had been already intending to move forward. They have funding for it, for an update to the standards. That's what we care about, not exceptions, but an updated set of new standards. That's what they've committed to publicly for 2 years. And that's what they've reiterated recently and agreed that they would be accelerating that process because they are overdue in initiating it and completing it.
Okay.
That's different from their historic approach of MOUs going forward to exceptions. It's a new set of standards.
Okay, had not appreciated that, and I saw
Oh.
Philip nodding,
Well-
so.
Well,
I'm
sorry, but-
Let me finish my
Yeah.
thought here, is that I did understand and had heard their commitment to develop a guide for cities. I, quite frankly, was not aware that they had committed to modifying their standards as a part of that guide. So Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say is they have not, at least I have not heard that they have promised that they would change any of these things, just that they would relook at them. And
Well, I did not state that they had promised they would change specific standards.
Nope.
That's part of the process. I didn't state that.
Oh, no, and I'm not.
But I
I'm not
will
suggesting-
say that they have clearly said that they will begin a process of reviewing and updating their standards. And I'm surprised that that's news to anybody here, because I've said it for over a year, publicly and privately. So when you meet with them on Monday, I think it's really important to understand that this has been an open discussion in the LPMG meetings publicly on multiple occasions. I've reported back to the council to that effect on multiple occasions, and I'm really surprised that staff has a different perspective. And all you had to do was ask them, because they've been forthright. Anytime I've talked to them, they've been willing to say, yeah, that's what we're intending to do. And then they said, we're apologizing, we're planning on kicking it off within the next couple of months. And then that kept getting pushed out. But they've been clear on what their intention was.
Yeah, so I don't want to detract from what you're saying, but just to note that that is our understanding, that they would review and look at them, but not necessarily, they might not change things that we're hoping that they might change.
That's an uncertainty. Yeah.
Okay, I know we have more to discuss, but let me just, I forgot about going back to the public for comments, but this time, if there's comments on the Embarcadero Road improvement project, if there is comments on white zones, and now on the standards, Caltrain standards, you can speak to those. I think we have one speaker. Nadia?
Hi, thanks. I'm going to take off my mask just so you can hear me super clearly. So I actually went back and watched last month's rail meeting again, twice actually, and took pretty copious notes. I realize not a lot of people do that, but Michelle Bouchard was super clear. You guys asked her, is the problem of having technical standards, it's been taking so long, is the issue funding? And she replied, no, funding has not been our issue. We have actually engaged a technical standards team that's working on that. And separately, they've engaged a separate consultant that's going to take a macro view of the project in terms of the grade separation corridor across, the entire corridor. They specifically asked you to send them whatever technical questions you have so that they can consider it as part of their projects, and the technical team can look at them. They did not make promises that they will change them, but they're certainly reviewing them. And part of the reason they're reviewing them relates not just to what Palo Alto is concerned about, but that the cost of grade separations in Redwood City, in Burlingame, and all the other places where they're working on them have gone up so significantly as a result of their existing standards that frankly, they have no choice. So this is part of a financial decision for them as well. So just keep that in mind when we think about, well, there may be no chance of getting these changed. They need to change them because otherwise we can't afford to do grade seps, and they need those grade separations. In terms of the order of importance of these, I think the thing about the freight speed and the passing tracks are obviously the most important. I would really say that we should highlight with them. But I did have some offline conversations with Caltrain staff. They are looking hard at those standards. And so I just want to encourage you. I did send, unfortunately, I'm sorry, it was early this morning, but I did send my very technical list that includes not only all the things that XCAP has reviewed through its process, but things that CARD and my work on high-speed rail has done over the years. And so you should have an extensive technical list in there of things that we can look at. And I would encourage you to think about taking that and bringing it to the full council if you need to, but deciding on what you need to send in. I mean, hopefully Rail Committee, I think, can make that recommendation because it already falls within their purview. You actually shouldn't have to go to council because this was already referred to you. And if you guys agree with my list, then hopefully that would be something that you guys could make a motion on and move forward and direct staff to have that specific conversation with them, either at this upcoming meeting, which may be too early, or before the next meeting. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to speak on items
You just got another raise hand.
B and C and D, E, F, G?
Okay.
Adrian, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I just wanted to second and amplify exactly what Nadia just said. She is correct. That lines up with my memory of the meeting and what Michelle said, Interim Director Michelle Bouchard. And they, yeah, everything Nadia said is right on. And just wanted to confirm all of that. So thanks.
Thank you. So bringing it back to the committee. I do want to say that I also heard her, Ms. Bouchard say that, you know, the one size doesn't fit all. Each of the city have different grade separation, grades, how the rail crosses into the city. So this is actually a work that they're doing, not just for one city, but for many cities. So I really think that, you know, some of the work that XCAP did, especially with the technical work, technical questions, it should be something that's forwarded and asked. The other one that I wanted to kind of mention, the 4-track. I think the question there is also to find out if it absolutely necessary has to be in Palo Alto. So if there's a way to find out about that, I think that question should be posed. Our right of way is so narrow and is so close to so many of the people's homes that, you know, maybe it's not something that should be here in Palo Alto. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm sorry, yes,
Yeah, no.
please, Allison.
So who is the city's representative at this new group that the Caltrain's putting together?
well, we'll see what they do put together. The proposal I made to the LPMG would be that it would be a combination of LPMG members and city staff from each of the cities that are addressing grade separations
Okay.
currently.
So more than one, okay. And who do we think is responsible for sending in the technical questions that were just referenced? Is that staff or is
Staff.
that? Okay, so do we need to take action on that? Or
Um,
didn't staff?
Yeah.
Has
Sorry,
staff
so
already done that since last time?
Yeah, so, sorry, I think I meant to say this in the staff updates if I didn't, but we're meeting with Michelle on Monday and we plan to follow with a letter. Unless you prefer that letter to come from Rail Committee or the mayor or otherwise, we had planned on just sending that.
Oh,
first.
I think that's great. The question I would have is whether we should have a separate letter on the 4-track so that we break it up and we, maybe it's going to be more effective if we have 2 letters, one on all the technical standard and the other on the passing track location.
So
And
just,
actually,
just to be, if I could just to clarify, the rationale or the basis for the meeting we have with Caltrain was the 4-track. These additional issues have been added since, and in fact, I don't think we're gonna have time to get into it with them on Monday, but so given that, I suspect it would be better as separate communication.
Okay, and do you guys feel comfortable with all the technical issues that will staff send the letter? Do we want to send it under the mayor's signature or not? What would be the best way on all of the technical issues?
Let's
Design
see.
and technical.
Excuse me just a minute. Aren't we on an item to talk about what the committee's work plan is and how to coordinate that with council?
That's correct.
Sounds like we're into a substantive area.
Well, this is a part of the work plan is to address both the 4-track and all of the technical issues that's laid out here.
But I think as noticed, this is to scope the work plan and prepare an item for council to remind council what items are already within. Can I finish, please?
Yeah.
To remind council what has been referred to rail already, which of course council could modify, and then to propose some new ideas and boundaries and questions about other areas and overlap.
What, so you missed the earlier part of the meeting. And the discussion we had was what portions of the work plan need to go to the council and what portions do not. And those that do not, the rail committee already has authority to act on.
Yes, but they're not on
But
the
we're not
agenda for
noticed to do
today.
it.
But taking action on those items
Yeah.
is not on the agenda for today.
Okay, well, in
Well,
that,
it's a discussion of the work plan. And are you saying that in discussing the work plan, we can't discuss acting on any of the work plan? That your definition of discussing it is only to say what should be in its content as opposed to discussing the work plan and what we do with it?
And doing work on the elements of the work plan, I don't think it's clearly noticed for that. That would be a different kind of a notice and a different kind of staff preparation too, although it sounds like the staff is well versed in these items. I think the item is noticed to define the work plan.
I didn't say define. I'm sorry. That's not the way it's written. It says discussion of the rail committee work plan,
Right.
not defining it. And your interpretation, clearly it seems to be limited to defining it. But that wasn't my interpretation of discussion of the work plan. That's more broad about discussing the elements of the work plan. And
So within that, the context of the work plan, what I was actually suggesting related to E, F, and G, again, to distinguish from the four tracks. Four tracks, again, we've already previously discussed and staff is following up. With respect to E, F, and G, I would suggest that those be captured as part of the rules, or sorry, the rail rules. Takes me back to the old world here. Rail committee work plan. And that staff will report back on progress related to those issues. So again, not specific as to what the follow-up is, simply that those issues will be captured as part of the rail committee's plan for the year.
Works for me.
so E, F, G, and then separate D, but would you include in there all the technical standards that were listed in Nadia's email this morning?
Not at that depth, quite frankly, for this conversation.
Okay, so, I mean, I would want to include that for council to, no, that was
So
already referred to
yeah,
us.
if we go back to what we're trying to do, which is to figure out what council, if council needs to give us more authority in certain areas and to confirm for council what we're working on. I don't feel like we have a lot of discussion we need to have today on D, E, F, and G, right? It's
That's-
fine. We get to work on it.
Yeah, that's already referred to us, so we
and it's
can,
part of the XCAP,
yeah, it
right?
is part of the
This
XCAP.
is not, this is, the council already adopted the XCAP, which included these recommendations.
So D, E, and F, G,
It's
F, G, I
okay.
don't think we need to.
Right,
Maybe if when staff puts the staff report together, it says like these things are in scope and the rail committee will continue working on
okay, well, with that clarification from Molly, then we could move faster. And let's go to H now. And I think Philip has already reported on this, right? Earlier.
That one's covered.
That one is
it.
covered.
So is it fair to say that that is part of our remit? Even though we haven't done any work on Palo Avenue Crossing?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your
Oh,
question.
remitted the committee? Yeah, it's part of the rail, sure.
Okay,
But we're gonna wait to hear back from Caltrain. They,
yeah, no, I'm just
I,
going in
I just
the
trying to
third
say
column.
is what the next step is. Okay.
Yep, I heard him say that.
Okay, let's go to I, downtown area coordinated plan housing element near Caltrain station area. Philip?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I wish I could have planning staff here to help me with this, but I want to note that planning staff does have a small grant that they are, I believe was approved by council fairly recently. That's going to do some housing work, but it's, I believe, not actually a coordinated area plan. And that's really all the progress that's been made for this. So there's not currently a downtown coordinated area plan that's in progress. And noting that this, similarly to the San Francisco Bridge one, although at least we're getting some kind of updates on that, this similarly ties in with the Palo Alto Avenue grade crossing, which has not been initiated yet. And just noting that really what we hope to do is move one of these other crossings into the next phase of the project. So go beyond project alternative selection and get into the environmental design phase before we start a new community outreach and alternative analysis process on grade separation.
So on I, while it is part of the rail committee's purview, it is not something that we're ready to deal with.
That'd be
Right?
probably, yeah, in
Yeah.
that priority column, my guess is that it would, the spreadsheet I had, that would probably be a 3-level priority if it were a 1 to 3 scale.
So does staff agree that this is already within rail committee's work plan, or is something that needs to go to council?
Well, to be frank, I would argue it needs to go to council because it's not sufficiently scoped for us to have a focused discussion.
Okay.
Agreed.
J, municipal services agreement with Stanford.
Yeah, I think this is, as staff says, finance or potentially costing services.
Well,
Say no to that.
let me speak to that. So the relationship to this is specifically on whether Stanford has any obligation to both participate in the rail design from a major stakeholder standpoint, and whether we have any arguments that this should be part of their municipal services obligation under the municipal services agreement, that they are obligated to provide for or provide all municipal services. The county study is looking at updating that to really make it broader and more contemporary if things are not included in that historic definition. It's 35 years old. And a question we would have is whether grade separations that are strongly focused on serving Stanford 100 or 200 yards away, whether they have any obligation in this whole process, including financially. And I don't know whether we can make the strict that argument. I brought it up in the last county meeting with the consultant planner for the county. He believed that we didn't have that legal basis to make that argument. I think our interests are making sure that we can't make that because it's very significant. Certainly when you look at the Stanford in the original University Avenue underpass, they contributed the land for all of that out of an obligation. It was a gateway to their university. And so we have that historic precedent. And I think we have real strong arguments that these crossings serve Stanford perhaps as much as they do Palo Alto. But whether we have any legal basis for that, and even if it's not a legal basis, are we still able to negotiate with them to participate because it benefits them?
Yeah, I think my concern here is with the title. I think if we call it relationship with Stanford or interaction with Stanford, I mean, then I feel very differently about whether or not it's part of our agreement, but I don't think the municipal services agreement itself, although it might eventually be a vehicle for Stanford's participation, even though it sounds unlikely in the train crossing. I think it's certainly reasonable for us to ask, council to say like, hey, does it make sense for a rail committee to reach out to Stanford and attempt to partner and discuss more? I'd be supportive of that.
But I think the municipals, so it would be only pertaining to the grade separation part in the municipal service agreement, right? Because that service agreement is more than just
Far more.
So
Yeah, the way I had it on my spreadsheet was
Community partner
one of the subsets under community partner engagement, engage with Stanford and Santa Clara County regarding a list of things, and included in that was the municipal services agreement.
The city have an interest in responding and interacting with Stanford and the county around the municipal services agreement in a holistic way, such that it might be benefit the city to have a body that's working on it, that's looking at all of the issues.
Possibly, yes.
Rail is certainly a significant one, but it's, as the committee points out, it's far from the only one.
I guess we actually already got that referral. This is so helpful. Thanks for reminding us. C3 here is facilitate engagement with PAUSD and Stanford on all grade crossing. So they've, council's already told us we can do that. And if as a result of engaging with Stanford, we believe that, working with the municipal services agreement is the right approach, then that's fine. But I think that for our work plan, it should be narrower than how Jay is described and more in keeping with C3. And it's possible that that would be an outcome.
Narrower or broader? I mean, if it is inclusive but not limited to the municipal services agreement, that's broader than rather than narrower.
The municipal services agreement is this big and the intersection with
Oh, I
rail
see.
is this portion.
So
That's
narrow
important.
within the municipal service agreement, but I was responding to what you had said earlier, is that the conversation with Stanford would not be limited to the municipal services agreement. And that's the
I'm
way I've
saying,
got it.
yeah,
written.
well, I'm saying the inverse, that we would engage with Stanford, and if we or we collectively feel that a municipal services agreement is the right way to go, that's fine, but this presupposes that that's the vehicle.
Yeah, so if you look at my version, it's more aligned with what you're describing.
I think she has the old list, right? So
Yeah,
if
but
she
I
has
think,
the old list, then
so I
it's not on
emailed,
there.
I realized, but no, it's still, even on the old list, it
It's on the
says,
old list.
engage with Stanford and Santa Clara County on the following things: bike ped designs, grade separation design, review of Stanford paying for grade separation, Stanford Municipal Services Agreement,
Yeah, well, maybe we just say that,
flushing that out. That was the
yeah,
first draft.
maybe it's, yeah, some version of this. Staff is listening to us. I'm sure they can figure this out, that could include, incorporation into the municipal services agreement if appropriate.
But this is a item that goes to council for them to,
Well, again, council's already told us
except for
to
the
engage
narrow.
with
part.
Stanford on grade crossing. And so I think if you look at the mayor's list, I think you could say that bike ped designs are probably part of that, grade separation, history of Stanford paying for it, investing. The last two is where it gets a little bit more less clear and more frankly specific as to the outcomes rather than the work that is being done. That makes sense?
Well, I guess my question also is, underneath it is K, Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. So do we want to separate this discussion with Stanford to each of its own committees? I mean, to our own committees? Or should it be looked at, as
My
a,
instinct is that we probably would be better off, negotiating is a strong word, working with Stanford as a collective body, but that's just my instinct. I haven't had, a moment to think about it.
And on the SCAP, we have our own collaboration with them more broadly on all
We'll
sustainability
get to
issues. So this would only be related. There's an argument that could be made that that the grade separations are tied to Stanford's sustainability plan and commitment. Caltrain and its expansion are the backbone of their transportation and certainly their TDM program. They even funded the master plan study for Caltrain. So they recognize the criticality of that. What they haven't been willing to recognize is that in their own environment, there's a critical constraint, which is the grade separations.
I think we need to bifurcate it. I think we need to work with them on the train crossings and maybe recommend to the council that the council decide who should work on the municipal services agreement, because that hasn't been decided. And that would be a worthy thing for us to contemplate and get staff's input as to how to manage it.
Right. And there's the statement here that says that with the SCAP ad hoc and then our committee, there might be a conflict.
I think, are we done with Jay? Are we going on to K now?
I look at them almost as one, but then, yeah, so let's finish J. I think, like you said, it's already decided, so.
But I think what we've surfaced today is a recommendation to council that we, as a council, figure out who should work on the MSA.
So would that be for both J and K?
No,
That's the
that
question.
for me, I'm just with J.
Okay,
So when you're ready, we can move to K.
right. If there's nothing else on K,
On J or K?
K. Oh, I'm sorry, on J. I'm sorry, J.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Okay, if you're good, then let's move to K.
Oh, that's sweet. That's what we should have had for.
Yeah, I'm not understanding the potential conflict. Well, first, I'm not clear on why this is here.
Yeah.
Well, if we're all good with it not being on there and us doing our work in our.
Well,
other
I'm first
meetings,
asking,
that's
is there, does staff have any
Maybe
reason why this is, would be part of the rail committee work
No,
plan?
I don't think we do. So we're fine with it going through existing channels.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, that was easy.
fine. Can I just ask from a time check standpoint, are we still headed towards 4 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just be right back.
Should we take a break?
I'm taking a break.
Let's take a,
Sure.
let's take a
Take
2-minute break.
Or
Yeah.
Sorry, is that official? Are we taking an official break?
Yes, we are.
Apparently.
Great.
29.
5 minutes, okay. I need to make a quick call.
Okay.
Does it on her computer?
Oh, we do it from, oh, well, we ended it, I think. Let's see if that works.
Did we? Did I end it somehow?
Oh, no. Now check with it.
Philip, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear us? Okay, thank you. So we're gonna go back. I think the rest are pretty easy, right? So L is PAUSD and Stanford coordination, which is already part of the work plan, I believe.
Yeah.
In relations to rail and grade crossing matters. We can all agree on that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then M, seismic upgrade of existing Alma Road Bridge over Embarcadero Road. That's also, does staff have anything to say about that?
Well, let's see. Philip, do you have any comments on this item?
Well, no, not really, except for, I mean, I think this is typically something that we would look at more closely if the closure was the option that we, is recommended to move forward into the next phase.
Yeah, and I think this one probably is gonna be, if on a priority kind of setting, it would probably be a 3 or something like that, right?
Yeah, I don't think we need to do any work on this.
Not
until
yet.
and Unless the partial underpass fails, and then this is our designated next alternative.
Okay. Then we have N, engage with local policymakers group and Caltrain. It's already referred, and
Yep.
the mayor's on the LPMG, so already engaging. O, so speak up if you want me to stop moving forward. O,
No, I'm just, that engagement, it says, that coordination, I guess it goes back to this question on how we're going to do the follow-up communication. So is it understood, is staff going to do a letter on, I think that's where it was left, right?
On the technical issues
Yeah.
as well as the four track,
Okay,
separate letters.
good, okay.
O, presentation from outside agencies, public and private. I think that's necessary. So that's part of the work plan already, or does it need to go to council? I think that's part of the work plan already, right?
Well,
Yeah.
again, let me ask Philip to comment, but I would note that we will need some clarity on both who and when and the logistics of expectations there, so that we can follow up accordingly.
Thank you. And I do want to note one thing that we do want to keep in consideration. If we have specific vendors that we bring in, that might create procurement issues at a later date. So we might want to proceed carefully with that, just to note that ahead of time.
So an example is on the Jack Box construction, and whether we would either have Long Island Railway, who has acquired a whole bunch of Jack Box constructions, or they've done it with this Italian company who does most of them in the world. Would there be a conflict if we had a presentation from even the contractor? Would that be a potential conflict?
I would want to talk with procurement and legal to determine that.
Yeah, well, you've got legal right here. You can't see Molly. I'm kind of asking.
Oh, no, I'm aware they're there.
Yeah, I felt we would have to look at structuring that to avoid that problem.
Okay.
So I guess the question here is, we're gonna go to council for clarification on this? Not necessary.
I'll just say that I think to the extent that we have presentations, they should be, directly associated with decisions that we're trying to make. So.
Sounds good to me. P, funding opportunities. I think that's already being, you guys are already working on that and inquiring, right, with VTA, Caltrain, state, federal.
Well, yeah, the way I framed it in mine was, forget, was really what should be the role of this committee, and I think that maybe needs to go to the council. And whether the council wants to delegate to this committee some degree of activism in tracking key legislation and advocating for funding. It's, it's a combination of staff pursuing it, but a lot of it is also political. And so I think that probably needs to go to the council and have them authorize the committee to do that. What we did, the previous rail committee, the rail committee was authorized to do that, but we probably want to make sure that's in the remit that we've received from the council.
I guess the other logical place would be the finance, if it was around funding, so thoughts on which one would be more appropriate?
I would think it's rail committee on rail stuff.
Well, I would think that you still need to go to council for them to direct.
Right.
Right, but I'm just thinking through, like, if I think it's a logical question, right? What would the other alternative be if it's not with the rail committee? Then I think the other logical alternative would be finance. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying we should contemplate the other place that responsibility might reside. And would we be, what specifically would we be asking for?
According to Pat's document, there is monitoring and engagement on Caltrain, high-speed rail, and other state rail legislation, including funding.
So you're in other technical updates. Is that where you are? Because there's also funding up above under the.
Yeah,
the funding and
one that I
legislation.
re-emailed, or that I don't know if you could post that.
I
Yeah.
also forwarded it.
Oh,
Yeah,
so,
but I didn't bring
yeah,
a
she doesn't have
computer.
a
No one told
computer.
me to bring a computer.
I wonder, is it possible to share this? Can we, oh, there we go.
There we go. Maybe on one page, let's see, bigger.
So just to chime in, I think that it really depends on the level of discussion that we're having, because noting that, if we're talking about grant funding opportunities that would pertain to grade separation, I think it would be appropriate for this committee to discuss them. And, if we're talking about approving a grant award or something like that, I think we need like council, potentially council resolutions. So there's different.
Yeah,
levels.
it's the way it's described in mine is rail committee to help pursue regional, state, and federal grant funding opportunities, not to own them.
Yeah, I think that from my, and of course, listening if Molly or Tim chime in, but I think that is within should be within the rail committee's authority.
Yeah, although, but
Sorry.
should, but I don't know that we yet have been assigned that.
Would those grants,
Yes, I should say should be requested.
would those grants require a local match, Mr. Canny?
I'm sorry, I only heard something about local match.
Would those grants require a local match?
Oh, yes, certainly. Now, noting that.
That's an example where that's not really our job. That's probably more in finance.
Well, so I think that actually depends on how council delegates this, because noting that grade separation funding that we currently have through Measure B is actually local funding. That's local funding that also requires a local match, but that is local. So if we were to get a federal,
you're both getting me headaches.
Sorry, I'm going to spin you in circles here, but if we were to get a federal grant for grade separation, we could use our Measure B dollars as local funding to match that federal funding. But we'd also need other
match
outside
to the
funding.
local match.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
Okay, so what is the suggestion then that we should ask for from council?
I would say the remit that is for the rail committee to help pursue those funding opportunities. That doesn't.
Okay, so the second bullet, not the first.
um,
You have two underfunding. the second. Yeah, I think. I'm fine
Yeah,
with that.
the first one is already in process.
Yeah, I'm
That's
fine
just
with that.
listed.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. I should have-
I'm sorry, which one were you saying?
I
So,
think he means the second one on the, if you're looking at what's on the, you can look on the screen.
Yeah.
Of the iPad, the iPad has it. I don't know if you can see that better than what you have. It's the second bullet under funding.
So it says rail committee to help pursue regional, state and federal grant funding opportunities?
Yeah.
Okay,
So that means we can write letters and we can ask you to give us information and,
we can meet.
yeah, okay.
okay, and that has, and that needs to go to council in order for approval
Request.
Delegation.
to delegate. Okay, if we don't have anything else, let's go to Q, review of guiding principles.
So this is where we have two different kinds of guiding principles. I recall this referral about whether or not we should, review the evaluation criteria. We had so many discussions of that over so many years about trying to organize them and or weight them. So if that's of interest, I'm sure we can do that. But it
And
sounds like
are
we
there
should-
other guiding principles besides the evaluation criteria?
No, and that's what I
Okay,
was
then I
getting
just
to
have
you
to-
again.
yeah.
Suggested
So
a
then
different
we
approach.
just change that title to evaluation criteria on the left column.
In terms of guiding principles of this committee.
That's earlier. Do we have that elsewhere on this list?
No.
Oh, so it's on my list. So we have a second thing, which is rail committee guiding principles. So that goes back to what things were on my list that aren't captured on this one.
And we can look at the examples that were from previous, right?
Right.
I think 2017. So,
Oh, you're talking about on the criteria part.
oh, is that the criteria? for it?
We look back at the old rail committee for guiding principles, see if they help inform us. I wouldn't think they'd be identical at all because that was more focused on high-speed rail, but it just also might kind of give us a sense and speed the process.
So evaluating the guiding principles.
So I think Q is really April 26, 2021, part 2, right? Which was the grade separation criteria. I think that's what's been referred to us.
Yes.
And so that presumably can remain on our work plan.
Agreed.
Okay?
Mhm.
Is there, I hesitate to ask this, but is there anything on the list of things that have been referred to us that is not in the alphabet soup A to Q?
I have a couple.
Okay.
So Q, I'd like to add Mr. Soma, as it's the pole coloring.
Oh,
That
summer.
Summer. That he had spoken to at public comments in terms of finding out from Caltrain if we can paint those poles to match the rest of the poles. They're kind of beige right now and they should be painted the green that the other poles are. So I was wondering if that's something that we can pursue.
Well, I think, again, process-wise, what we're discussing is an item that the rail committee is taking on as a topic that the council would be asked to agree is being assigned to the rail committee to take on as a topic. Actually, doing what Mr. Summer has proposed would be in and of itself a project that would need to be evaluated in terms of resources required and staff allocation.
So that would have to go to council for approval then, or consideration.
Well, ultimately, again, this assumes that the committee wants to put it on your work plan, the council agrees, great, committee go work on it. At some point, staff will need to do enough work to present the topic to the committee to say, here's what we think your path forward is. Then that will then need to go back to the full city council for action and whatever that action happens to be. I will share, I've seen the most recent correspondence from Mr. Summer and also have observed the back and forth over, it's probably years at this point with Caltrain, and would submit that this would be a big project, not unlike getting fencing along the Caltrain right away.
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of like curious as to why Caltrain decided to paint all of that beige versus all.
Because the ARB decided
Oh,
that they should be beige. They're specifically as a result of architectural review board action, the beige color in Palo Alto to match the historic building across the way.
And
oh, there's a historic building across
I
the way.
think it's historic. that's
actually, I think it's the
station.
station itself, yes.
Yeah, so yeah,
And it was reviewed subsequent to the decision by the ARB, I believe within the last 6 months or maybe a little more than that.
was it?
And the ARB did not take it up again as a use.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess, that's new information, so,
I think the argument is that the ARB looked at it at ground level and not at, from a different angle.
okay. So what would is recourse be? Valid appeal?
I don't know if there's any recourse.
Okay, well, then I'll take this off my list. Withdraw it.
Just to note, I believe Mr. Summer Harris would like to speak.
Oh, okay.
Whenever you decide it's appropriate.
Let us finish this with any other on the list. I have one more, and I think I brought it up last time at the last meeting of having an ex-cap member as just to be part of to attend these meetings
That's a
as a,
participant.
not as a member of the public, but at this table. Because there are some things that we're going to be discussing that they've already discussed, and they can update us and provide valuable information.
I would support. I don't think that needs to go to the council. It's just how we function as a committee.
Well, it depends what it might not practically make any difference, but you can certainly invite and welcome experts and folks to assist you as you wish. But the vice mayor's proposal is to change the composition of this committee to be a 4-person committee.
No, it would be like the SCAP where we have 5 community advisors and we
Invite them to join.
So how would that work? Nadia would sit here on this side with us?
to the table and we could engage and ask questions more, less formal way.
And are you assuming it would be Nadia? Have you already talked about this?
Actually, I was just kind of wondering if we can kind of reach out to the
Could be.
chair
Two
and
of
the
them.
vice chair,
Yeah.
right? And see if they both want to be part of this, or they would designate one of them. But I think the invite would be to the chair or the vice chair, and slash or the vice chair. Molly, you had something?
We're just, I see what you would like to do, and I'm sure there's a way to do it, but there are some technical issues on our side that I think we need to look at.
And we did something very similar in the previous rail committee meetings. We had them less formal and we really engaged at that time with kind of several members of CARD who did legislative tracking on our behalf, far more than we were able to do, and other analysis, and really expanded our expertise in specific areas.
Right, and the committee structure is intended to provide for less formality, more opportunities for extended discussion. We just want to make sure that everyone understands the implications in terms of Brown Act, communications.
Well, it's not, so it would be as an advisor to the committee, not a committee member.
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
So I don't think that affects Brown Act one way or another.
We need to do some more thinking about it, but I'm sure that we can accommodate what it is you're interested in doing.
Okay.
Okay, so I look forward to learning more. Those were mine.
Okay.
Do you?
I had the trench study, and that was an open technical issue of the independent party on the trench. A couple questions on that. One is the sequencing and whether we should be going forward with that ahead of getting better clarity from Caltrain in the South Palo Alto crossings. I think that the what do we call it? Partial underpass? No, we call that Elizabeth alternative. I don't think that's highly affected. Let's see, that's, oh no, this was, I'm sorry, this was outside of that. So it was folks wanting to re-examine and not eliminate the trench until we had taken another look at costs on it. But, oh, now I think this through, whether that's a 2-track trench or a 4-track trench would drastically impact that study. And so then it's a question of whether we should go forward on the trench study one way or another until we've gotten an answer from Caltrain on 2 or 4 tracks.
So we can just put that on the list then.
Yeah, I mean, as of right now, it's part of the AECOM set of assignments. We had a separate issue on if we're looking for an independent review of their work, whether they should be overseeing the independent review of their work. That's a separate related question. But didn't we have the trench study that was going forward? I'm questioning whether we should go forward on it until we get a clarification from Caltrain.
Well,
I think we need to ask staff to bring us back up to date on what happened with that. Go ahead, Philip.
yeah, sorry, if I can, I think the idea, and just a note, I think not to confuse anybody, it's a cost estimate review, and the idea is to get a cost estimate review from an agency outside of AECOM of the trench, not a trench study per se.
Right.
To understand, and I think to answer that question, I mean, I think the driving force behind that is to make sure that the cost estimate is that AECOM has provided is within reason, in order to determine that that cost is not one of the driving factors for making the trench not an appealing selection.
Agreed.
So and so just to note that I don't think we need to know to determine that whether it's 4-track or 2-track, because the cost comparison would be to what AECOM estimated for a 2-track trench.
Yeah, we could do it that way, just for apples to apples, do a 2-track. But here's the counter, if Caltrain said, no, you've got to have 4 tracks, what was the point of going through this additional expense of the third party?
Well, my understanding is the idea behind it is to determine whether the cost estimate that we currently have for the trench is within expectation.
Let me explain further then. If we're looking at a 2-track trench and we ruled it out because it was too costly, but we got another study that showed, oh, maybe it's not so costly. That's one thing. But if it's 4-track and it's too costly either way, then what's the point? So, if we anticipate that a 4-track trench would be extremely costly, that the differential in cost goes up on the trenching more than it might go up on some of the other alternatives, then that might not, it might render that not a useful exercise.
That wasn't part of it. I don't recall the 4-track being a part of the discussion the night the council directed this.
Yeah, but it is
I
part of the
understand that. I'm
reality.
just saying that, you know, we can ask the vice mayor, you know, I don't. That it was, I believe it was your motion. So. It's an interesting point. It wasn't part of the discussion the night that we made the decision that I recall. Where is that in the process, by the way?
Which?
The-
The cost estimate?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
cost
review
study.
of the cost estimate.
Yes.
Third party.
So apologies, I thought I mentioned this at the beginning, maybe I missed it in my updates, but the AECom contract will be at council on Monday for approval.
It's
And-
not AECom doing it, but
Yeah.
AECom is gonna go subcontract somebody to review theirs. Okay.
Yes.
Why is AECom subcontracting somebody to review their numbers and not us?
So this was discussed previously at the last rail committee meeting, but just to refresh a bit, it's standard in the industry to have an agency hire a subcontractor to do cost reviews for them. That's not outside of the industry standard. So I just want to note that. And if rail committee had directed us to otherwise do a separate procurement for a cost estimate, we could do so. Likely would be additional cost to do so, and the firm would likely not have as much background information, would not have spent as much time in the community, and also we might have trouble actually getting a separate bidder for that, because what we would be having is most of the large firms that work on grade separation will likely be trying to preserve their bids for the project, and that might preclude them from future bidding. So we likely would end up with a smaller firm that would bid on that type of project. Might not have the type of experience that would be necessary to have the background information into what the actual trench project is.
Thank you for refreshing my memory.
Yeah, we'll say that it may be an industry practice, but it's a problematic one. And with VTA, with BART right now, we're going through this question of re-examining the cost. And I was able to get through in the VTA board action that it would be an independent peer review committee in that case. We're not talking about a peer review here, but the point is, how independent can you have the review be? And if they're a subcontractor for AECom, are we going to get much independence in that? And I'm skeptical of that.
Okay, so I would like to end at 4. I have another appointment. So if there's more to put on the list, can we go ahead?
Let me see if
and
there's anything quick. I had down community partner engagement from PAUSD and Stanford, and related to PAUSD, payback, safe routes to school, all the folks who really should be engaged going forward with this more than they perhaps have been. And that was part of our frustration, and XCAP is trying to get these folks engaged. And I think that as a rail committee, we might be able to do that more effectively.
I think that's in L,
L?
in the work plan
Sorry.
that the
Well, sort of, yeah.
PAUSD and Stanford coordination.
Yeah, and I would
And
just
paybacks
expand it
and-
beyond
Paybacks in A,
in what?
A,
A,
part A.
okay. Okay. Good enough. I would say too that we safe routes to school and stuff, we want to have as a delivery partner separate from PAUSD. And they've been more engaged, I guess, on this than PAUSD was willing to be.
Do we need a motion? Or what is staff? Did staff hear us? Or do we have to go through the?
Go through it again.
motion?
No, I
Or the
think-
motion?
Just say the number, the letters that need to go to the town. Well, yeah,
That'd be good.
but before we do that, do we go to public? Before we do the motion, let's go to the public.
Okay.
So I think Martin Summer has his hands up for quite a while.
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. It's actually summer, like the season summer. So
Okay,
yeah.
so sorry.
that's all right. Hey, and just for what it's worth, I actually went back to work for a couple hours and came back and was fortunate to catch you. So thank you, everybody, for your time. The question that you were just discussing of whether it should be on the list, I technically don't know if it needs to be on the list, but what I would really like to have is a direct conversation with Peter and Caltrain. We could have a private three-way conversation, perhaps at his office, and just explore possibilities. And then it wouldn't need to be council and rail committee and et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to make a bigger deal out of it than what it really is. And then lastly, I think it was Ed sitting in the back that said various comments about a larger project and all this, and after it for many years. The reason why I'm after it for many years is that it's a daily major pain point. It's just, you wouldn't believe how annoying this is outside my window on a daily basis. So yes, for me and the neighbors in our complex, I'm trying to get it fixed. So whether it ends on your list today, or not, if I could just please give me the chance to talk, set up some sort of appointment with Peter and he can connect with the people at Caltrain and we can have a discussion. I would really appreciate your support. So that's it.
If I might ask Peter, who?
I think you might mean Philip.
I think so too.
I'm-
Philip, did you mean Philip Conley,
Philip
our
Conley?
transportation director? Oh, I guess we lost him.
Okay.
All right.
All right, Nadia.
Thank you. Let me take these backwards. I think the trench cost estimate would benefit from the geotechnical study because part of the issue is it so expensive that we shouldn't consider it? So besides waiting for the 4-track answer, you might also think about whether you wait until you get some geotechnical study that allows both AECOM and the third party to now revise whatever that estimate is and see if that number moved up or moved down, because I think that was XCAP's concern all along. In terms of reminding everyone, the guiding principles that the rail committee had before really helped. A word I didn't see on there was you were looking for funding opportunities, but also advocacy. So previously what happened was it gave the members of the rail committee the ability to be able to go, for example, set up a meeting with former Mayor Ed Lee of San Francisco and talk about grade separations. Or we went to Sacramento and gave testimony. I remember Nancy Shepherd went up there and she gave testimony, which was part of the committee. They also met with League of Cities. Always the understanding was they could only lobby for and advocate for exactly what was in the guiding principles. They could not, for example, if they had their own opinion on, whether a trench was better than a tunnel, talk about that. They were very limited in scope, but they could go to these kind of key meetings and speak on behalf of Palo Alto. And so I think you want to think about that going forward, particularly if Senator Becker is going to be having meetings where they're going to be talking about funding. It allows members of this committee to then figure out, okay, who can make it up to Sacramento? And I will warn you, it is a long trip for 2 minutes of comment, but sometimes it's what it takes. They need a body, they need a face. Lastly, XCAP mentioned that for the evaluation criteria to be updated, ironically, both the guiding principles and the evaluation criteria are both from 2017 to make it confusing for everybody. The evaluation criteria that XCAP went through thoroughly has lots of conflicting information that is based on, and what XCAP suggested was that you review the comp plan, the 2012 bike ped plan, because we didn't have another one, and the former rail corridor study. Included in XCAP's appendix, which is very long, is a copy of the comprehensive plan with every section that I could think of that might relate to standards that conflict highlighted, so that if staff wants to go through those pages, I'm looking at you, Rippon, this would be the segment that you're going to go through, and I'd be happy to help with that offline since I know that stuff well. And lastly, I would just say, on behalf of myself, I'd be happy to participate in any meetings. Other XCAP members might be able to as well. The way it worked in previous rail committee meetings, if you guys remember, was only on certain items would you necessarily call up folks. It wasn't that that person had a permanent seat at the table. It was just if there was something that was happening to be up for discussion. So it sort of avoids the handout popping that happened today, and again, I apologize. But you did review basically everything soup to nuts that I worked on for 3 years, so that's what was happening. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you for your work. Okay, motion?
Is it on the work plan, including which items are need to go to council? Is that what the promotion would be? Or just on the items to go to council, or what do we need to have a motion?
What the committee's current remit is.
No, we don't have that.
Right, no, currently have that. You know, maybe to that point, it struck me that as we were going through the items, this reads almost less like a work plan and almost like a scope.
Yeah.
Or a domain, which is helpful. I think in a lot of ways, it does communicate to the council and with council approval that these are the issues that will be the domain of the rail committee, and we could write it up that way.
I would recommend that.
Huge rush. Could we ask staff to come back next month with what our remit supposedly is, what the principles were in 2017? What they heard from us here, like a draft. I'm asking them to do the work, so we don't wade our way through emotion.
I think it's helpful for council to have the full context, not just a list of maybe.
So we could break it into kind of two parts. Here's the full work plan, and here are the specific ones that we need council authority in order to include in that work plan.
Right.
And here's the way we're gonna do our work, a little bit of that, like we're gonna incorporate, people with expertise in an informal manner to whatever extent is permitted.
Great, and I would suggest also clarifying, this is a big principle, and I think everyone's in agreement on this, but just to repeat it publicly, that things that the mayor and vice mayor have been referring to about advocacy, letters, coordination, meetings, those are things that committee members can do directly when the council has said, yes, we want you to work on this. There are other things that committee, the real core of the actions that the city is going to take, those are recommendations from this body to the full council to approve contracts, to approve projects, to these kinds of things, spend money. All of that is not done directly out of committee in our system.
I think the other thing that would be helpful when this comes back is a calendar for the rest of the year, so we can see these different buckets and when we might see it. And I think then that will help us with the prioritization and the organization, this is a long list.
Yeah.
So if you guys could draft for us in consultation with the chair, here's which month we might come to you with which topics. We can see how that fits, and we can make sure that the trench study is after the geotechnical, et cetera.
Yes,
Motion? Do you need
I
one?
motion that the staff do everything I just said.
bring it back next month.
Okay.
Got it.
And
Wait, Philip is, yes,
you-
Philip?
Thanks.
can't
Oh, my
hear.
mic cut off. I can't hear you. We've got it recorded. It'll be fun.
I just think it would take us at least a half an hour to work through this. If we want letter by letter again.
And then I was just kind of wondering if we might be able to add the guiding principles, evaluate it for the next meeting as well as another.
Yeah,
Add a
they
topic.
should bring those
Right.
so we can see
So that we
whatever
can
they
see
were
it and
last
stuff,
time,
right.
and we can figure out if we want to recommend adjustments to the council.
Okay, so I second.
And the,
Do we have a date? We don't have a date for next meeting? Oh, no.
so this is the third Wednesday. What would that be next month? The 15th. Put on my calendar.
Well, did we do some SCAP thing or did we already put it on there? It's on another page, right?
Cool.
Afternoon of the 15th?
Right, we went the same time.
Oh, we did SCAP on the 14th.
15th, 1 to 4.
1 to 4,
Sounds good.
okay.
Yeah. Can we do
All right.
1:30?
1:30? Can you do 1:30?
Is that all right?
It's fine with me.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
All righty.
Okay.
Anything else? If we're.
Good.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
So she's in the.
great.